I'm going to call this meeting to what appears to be disorder. Um, at 1:08 on August the 2nd, 2023, we have a physical quorum, thankfully, and we have, okay, yes, all right, yes. So Chelsea. Okay,
Okay, Melissa Lammers,
present.
Jessica Gao. Here. Wendy Anderson. Here. Tyler Momberg.
Here.
Sarah Lee Morrissey. Sarah Lee's on the web, and she
I'm here.
would like to ask when we get the meeting to order if you can vote to let her
We will,
participate
all of them.
remotely. Bob Fitzsimmons. Here. John Hoblick. Here. Jack Surratt.
Here.
Eli Tobias. Bliss Jameson. Here. Bill likewise said he wanted to participate remote. Is Bill lights on?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. Bernie Lafice, Alex Zielinski. Okay, so we have a physical quorum, and you could vote to allow Sarah Lee and Bill to participate remotely if you'd like.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, so Bill and Sarah Lee get to participate. Who is DH?
That's me. That's our.
Oh, okay, and who's the icon at the 407 something or other number?
That's Bill.
That's Bill,
And
and
then-
so, and Jesse Wales is just observing us?
Yeah.
Okay.
So how do I get what I want on the screen now?
Okay, so now you want to share?
I do.
Okay, so go up top to share.
Can I just share this
Hi, Clay.
window? Okay. There we go.
Good to see you.
That's what you should,
Yes.
we're seeing now.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, I think we've, yeah.
For now, but I'm gonna
Um,
switch over in just a second.
Still.
Go ahead.
Darn. Of course, I didn't pick up a copy of the other. Thank you. So, would anyone like, has everyone read the minutes from our meeting 2 weeks ago, from which we've not yet recovered? The July 19th meeting. Ah, Alex is here. Would anyone like to make a motion to approve the minutes?
Yeah, I move that the July 19 minutes are approved as drafted.
Any seconding?
I'll second.
Any discussion? I just have one observation, line 1516. The presentation continued with the council work plan for this committee and a comparison of state and 16 county. Oh, okay, I think I know what that is. Never mind. Thank you. All those in favor of approving the July minutes?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Was that Bill? Okay, thank you. Then our next was to continue with our review. I'm sorry, I didn't pick up a copy. I have to open the.
The next item is just wetland discussion continued from our last meeting. So,
There were 4 items.
at the last meeting, you had 4 items that you wanted to discuss. Now, I'm going to try to change windows, but I'm not apparently super smart about this, so let's see. Here, that's not what I want. I don't.
We wanted, let me get those up because I have that here. Chapter 50.
Okay, I don't want to.
Why is,
I don't know why this is so difficult. Why I can't even get that up.
Ginger's recap of the things that were carryovers from our last meeting were, do you want me to go on, Ginger? Or?
Yes, I'm.
Okay. To define
this out.
implementation of avoidance and minimization as currently practiced. 2 were some examples of opportunities for comprehensive plan consistency with the ordinance. The 3rd, we were going to discuss buffer width with some suggestions and 2 pieces of research, both Brown et al., one from 1995, one from 2000, were circulated, and I'm sure everybody spent the weekend reading those. And 4, examples of buffer disturbances for residential accessory structures and ways that we could strengthen requirements for protection. Yes. Yes, and I'm sorry, Wendy wanted to ask a logistical question.
I was just going to ask about parking since, we were just, watching Ginger have a moment about that. Given that our meetings are 3 hours, sometimes we arrive, a few minutes before that or stay a few minutes after. Does the county offer any kind of like temporary parking pass for its committee members or boards so that we don't get ticketed by the city of DeLand?
No. So my suggestion is, for now, to park in the lot that's by the Athens Theater. That's the county staff parking lot, but there's no ticketing there, and there's no time limit. This lot across the street is a city of DeLand limit lot. We have no control over that. Like, that was me too. I just might have gotten a ticket.
We'll check with facilities. Certain standing boards have reserved parking. For example, the Planning and Land Development Regulation Committee and the Code Enforcement Board, because they meet on a regular basis and exceed 3 hours. I'll see if I can wrangle some parking spaces. Okay.
And
Thank
that-
you, Clay.
That would be at that Athens lot, though. Yeah.
There's also, it's a trek, but just on a, especially if you ever come to a nighttime council meeting, there's a parking garage that is on the other side of Woodland Boulevard, and I can't remember which cross
At the
street.
courthouse. There's a parking garage at the courthouse. That's free, and there's no time
And
limit
it's
there.
open at night. It got lots of parking. Oh, Chris?
Sorry, I just said and shady.
Yeah.
Yes, and shady. Shady meaning cool, not shady meaning,
Not sketchy.
A little of column A, a little of column B.
one never knows. Okay, we will start with our first carryover item from, excuse me one second. And that is, SB 250 was signed into law, and it means that the county council can't entertain any changes to any ordinances that would make them onerous or burdensome. So that can't happen. They can't consider those things until October of 2024. We had a nice discussion here, and we decided that our work would continue because it would take us to October 2024 to have our cogent recommendations ready. Fair enough. So just to bring you up to speed on that if you missed it. Thank you, Ginger.
Okay, and in case everyone hasn't noticed, this isn't Keith. So Keith had a family emergency this week, so he's out. But Todd Hanna, we introduced you last week. Those of you that were here last week, Todd is an ES3 in our environmental permitting activity, and so he and Keith are the ones that split up all of the commercial reviews for the environmental codes, and then Todd also supervises all of the environmental permitting field staff that do the single-family reviews. So we still have an expert. It's just not the one you're used to seeing. But between us, we should be able to muddle through this wetland discussion. So I provided a document that all the staff worked on after our meeting last week, which I'll just say too, 2-week turnaround is a lot. So I'm really glad we don't have meetings every 2 weeks on a normal basis. But so we took those 4 questions that you had at the end of the meeting, the 4 things we wanted to follow up. And we created this working document. And so everybody should have received that by email. And we can, as we go through, I'll make any notes or whatever. But hopefully we've got a lot of background material that answers those outstanding issues. So the first thing we talked about was defining how we currently are implementing avoidance and minimization of wetland and buffer impacts. So this first bit of this document is just a cut and paste of the existing standards for review in the wetland implementing ordinance in the land development code. So I just copied and pasted. You've all seen this language before, but these standards for review are really what is in our mind as reviewers when we're looking at any kind of permit that might impact wetlands or buffers. And so you can see, you know, what the ability of the wetland to receive surface water, the ability of the wetland to recharge groundwater. I don't necessarily want to read all of these unless you want me to, but a couple of the items here.
Is now exiting.
Oh, sounds like we lost Bill. Hopefully he'll pop back in. Yeah, number 10 is really one that gets to the heart of avoidance and minimization, and that is whether and the extent to which the proposed project must be located within the wetland or the water body in order to perform that project's basic functions. And so from a staff perspective, the way that we typically interpret that is, you know, what is the future land use and the zoning of that property? What are the development rights associated with that property? And then can you realize those rights without impacting the wetland? And if not, if you can't, for instance, build the single family house, or you can't build the mini storage unit, or whatever the project is without impacting the wetland, then that's how we get to something that we would permit. But if you can, we would ask for avoidance and minimization. So here's an example, and we do have some visual examples of some mostly buffer stuff, but that help illustrate it. But an example would be if it's a lot that's a single family residence and
Is now joining.
Bill, is that you back?
Yes, sorry, I'm in a really poor quality zone, so I'm going to try to hang on.
Okay. So if someone wants to build a single family residence and the lot is constrained by wetlands and buffers, you know, if they, for instance, wanted a 5,000 square foot house, we would say, okay, well, you know, you may need to go up. That may need to be a 2-story house. Rather than 5,000 square feet of surface impact, can you minimize your surface impact and still, you know, get the size of the house you want? And we would be advising that, you know, if your house, we can permit your house, but not necessarily an accessory structure like a pool or you know, mother-in-law suite, those sorts of things.
Last week, my takeaway was that avoidance, minimization, and mitigation were, they're a sequence.
Yes.
So, okay, thank you. So what we're talking about right now is we couldn't avoid building on this land. We can minimize by making it a 2-story structure. And if we can't do that, then we're into mitigation. Yeah?
Yes, absolutely. It's a continuum. Kind of like we talked about with low impact development, same thing, right? So number 10 is sort of the heart. Oh,
Just following up on that, when we look at basic function, I think what we talked about last time, just so we have it all in our minds, is the use, so single family use, but maybe not the front setback. You know, if you can avoid a wetland, but then you then encroach into a setback, staff would say you need to get a variance to avoid this wetland impact. That's
correct, right.
Yeah, do you have guidelines or something that you use to implement that? Because, you know, just 10 standalone is a pretty broad, you know, vague statement.
Yeah, so that's exactly,
Subjective thing.
that's
what I
actually,
was
that's
looking for.
exactly what we're talking about right now is what the staff would like to do in any code revisions is to better define what is avoidance and minimization. And right now we're talking about sort of what we use and then by practice what we do to try to help get to how would we identify some better standards, at least to make it more clear, because there are cases where our version of avoidance and minimization is different than what the developer or the homeowner or whatever is looking for, right? So That's exactly the point we're trying to get to, is can we better define that?
To that, because it's basic, the basic functions. So in practice, is this a conflict that happens quite often? Basic functions, you're determining the basic functions and there's a conflict there?
I wouldn't say on every, that part isn't on everyone, but the avoidance and minimization is. It's always, can you guys move the house forward closer to the front yard setback? Can you move the shed around to the side yard instead of putting it in the, on the seawall? Things like that. But the actual, that part is not really something that we have to conflict every day, because zoning usually handles most of that part.
Right. I just think, there's a certain vagueness to basic functions, and some people may think, the basic function's different than you think. Has it ever escalated into a legal circumstance on something like this?
It has escalated, so in the wetland code, as in really all of the sections of the land development code, if there's a determination by the environmental management director that, or the county forester, that the applicant doesn't like, they can appeal that to the development review committee. And then the development review committee can waive or modify the requirements of the land development code. If the DRC upholds the staff recommendation, or the applicant is otherwise unhappy with the DRC decision, that is appealable to council. So ultimately everything is appealable to council. So we haven't had cases where there was really like legal challenges, but there are occasionally times when the staff makes a determination that an impact is not meeting the avoidance and minimization criteria, and then those go to the DRC for discussion and review.
Well, that's better, actually. That's good. Thank you.
There's always a chance to to appeal it. Bob, did you, it's Alex and Tyler. Okay, thank you. Alex and then Tyler. Oh, Tyler. How nice of you, Alex.
Thank you. So I think in this vague area, one of the things that I would encourage us to work towards defining is, in zoning you have some maximums that are typically defined, and so if you have a 1 acre lot, it might have, say, a 35% maximum impervious coverage allowance, which means that you're allowed 35% of an acre to be covered with a house, a pool, whatever it is that you want. If your 1 acre lot has half an acre of wetland, and with your setbacks and other things you can't achieve that 35% coverage, there are some people that will read that to be a restriction on their development rights, and it sounds as if the current interpretation or current application of the code is that that's not a restriction on the minimums, even if it is imposing on the maximums. And I think that that's part of the gray area that makes my job particularly difficult, because I don't set the expectations of my clients, but I sit between the two sets of expectations frequently. So not taking a position on it, just making that observation that I think that's the gray area that's uncomfortable for all of us that have dealt with this.
Could you take a stab at summarizing that as what we're looking at? You said, I think the key in there was maximum, minimum, not maximum.
So if you have a lot, and if it were not for the wetlands, you could build a single story 5,000 square foot home versus a 2-story 5,000 square foot home. There may be reasons you don't want a 2-story home. You may have a mobility challenge, or a parent or somebody that's going to be moving into the house at some point. And so that could be a restriction on your view of the development rights for the property, even though it is a minimization effort that in other cases could be deemed reasonable. I think not having a definition of what is reasonable minimization puts everybody at a disadvantage in the conversation.
And as it relates to not having the kind of clear definition and it being vague, with the kind of interaction with the developers, or the applicants in this case, is there any required proof of avoidance and minimization, or is it just kind of, they said it in their email, so we're good? So there has to be multiple iterations of plans that you guys review.
Sometimes.
Okay.
And so here's an example of not a single family, right? Because on single family homes, we normally can find a way to get where we need to go, right? Setbacks, whatever, like, we can move houses around, those sorts of things. We don't often have, like a hard no on those. Where it's harder is if you have a commercial development or a subdivision. And so here's an example. On a subdivision, if you have to have a wetland impact because in order to meet safety requirements to get the fire truck around or whatever, and you have to have a loop road, and you have to impact the wetland to create your road or your infrastructure, that's pretty unavoidable, right? But if you decide to impact, 2 acres of wetlands because you want 5 more lots, so from an environmental perspective, that is avoidable. Now, whether or not that is financially feasible for the developers is really a different question. But from our perspective, we really don't think that creating new lots that are in wetlands that will require future wetland alteration permits is avoidance of wetland impacts, right? So, it's going to be impossible or nearly impossible to create a set of standards in this ordinance that addresses every potential situation that we have. But I think that we can work towards something that is a little bit more descriptive of what avoidance and minimization looks like in Volusia County. So, but I don't think we're going to get to where it says, and you can always have at least 25% of the wetland, and like that's going to be pretty hard. But
Jessica?
Clay, you want to go?
I just wanted to kind of interject real quickly here. Tyler goes through the development process with cities in Volusia County all over, and I think it's really important to understand that whole process first before we start digging into the details. Typically, if you're coming in for a site plan for a non-residential use or multifamily use or a residential subdivision, you're going to schedule a pre-application. Here in Volusia County, when we have a pre-application meeting, and depending on what it is, when it's getting to the level of detail that you have with a site plan or subdivision, we will bring in Todd. We will bring in someone from development engineering. And as someone who was on the other side of the fence, we would prepare a conceptual plan. As we're going through that conceptual plan, we'll use aerial interpretation as well as the GIS data that's available, like National Wetlands Inventory, St. Johns River Water Management District, and that will be the basis of our concept plans that before we start doing into the deep dive of a survey or environmental assessment. And it's very much of a back and forth. That's when a private sector representative will be talking to try and maximize what their client is trying to get on that. And that will be where the local government staff is sitting there saying, here are these important areas that have to be preserved and protected. And that's where kind of, as Ginger was saying, coming up with a very clean, neat definition of every criteria when that is happening, just looking at the diverse natural resource we have here, we can't even do that. So that gives you the insight of where that pre-app is where the developer, his consultants, understands what the staff is saying is avoidance and minimization. And as Ginger hit it right on the head, is that we understand that there may be a need for impact to wetlands for safety or other similar, but as long as they're the minimum amount of impacts, it could be allowable. Where you start seeing the need to impact wetlands because it's needed for a pro forma is not necessarily a justification to the local governments, because that's not our interest. Our interest is to ensure protection of the resource and following our codes. Then once you've gotten past that, that's when the real detailed site planning and engineering goes into place. And that's where you will see occasionally staff will sit there and say, yes, you are moving your building. Yes, you are readjusting your stormwater. We can't allow for this this small encroachment perhaps in this wetland buffer for your parking lot or something along those lines. But for the most part, we're not going to allow for wholesale impacts of the wetland or wetland buffer if it can't be justified as an overall benefit to the public. Is that a fair statement, Ginger?
And it may help to, oh, sorry. There are some more things, so it may help to kind of go through the things and then talk about all of them, but,
Just
yeah.
waiting to,
Well, I just want to comment, I think Ginger hit it perfectly, that this is one of those that is not quite as complicated as trees, but there are plenty of provisions in other areas of the code, not even what we're going to look at, that this is going to interact with. And so you see in certain places in the code where, say there's a minimum number of access points required, and it says unless there are environmental site features that conflict with it. And so there are other provisions on design that I think have to be related to this, to say you have to do this unless you're preserving wetlands, so kind of the inverse. But when we look at it from a basic function standpoint, you know, the 5 lots is an example. Does the developer need 5 lots? Maybe not. There are areas in, you know, the comprehensive plan and things like that where there's a minimum density. And so if you're in a situation where you have to have at least 4 units an acre, but not more than 8, then if you have wetlands on the site and you can't achieve that 4, then that's something that you need to look at too.
Right.
And so it's all kind of intertwined in a fun way.
Okay, so some of the other provisions look at, you know, whether the wetland can continue with, you know, to have its beneficial functions after the development is completed. And so we would look at, you know, does that proposed impact create a situation where the entire wetland no longer has its function? And then whether it's consistent with the policies in the comprehensive plan. And so we will talk a little bit about some comp plan policies too, because that was one of the other things on the list. But then in the mitigation
excuse me one
section-
second, Wendy has a question
Oh,
or a
sorry.
comment.
So we're really specifically talking about wetlands that are within the boundaries of a property that is going to be modified, developed, built on. Does any of the code apply to wetlands that are, say, adjacent or nearby to developments where the development would impact those wetlands next door? Is there anything in the code that addresses that?
The only thing that I can think of that really addresses that, I mean, if there's a wetland and it's right on the edge and the buffer extends onto the property, then the buffer is still protected on the property in question. But it's a little tricky because we don't necessarily have a wetland delineation on the adjacent parcel, right, to know exactly where that line is and where the buffer is. But the one place in the code that I can think of that is true is when you're talking about exempt excavations and and this is not in the wetland code, it's in the exempt excavation section of the code, talks about how far from a wetland that excavation can occur, and they have to demonstrate that there won't be drawdown of the wetland that's adjacent. So that may be off-site, right? You could be digging a pit on this property and the wetland impact could, if they don't demonstrate otherwise, could be on a different site. Do you have any other examples of where it's an adjacent wetland?
Not many, like, easily to find ones like that, like, without having, like, visuals, but.
There are some, and we'll show you a picture of Daytona Park Estates where those lots are all a bunch of lots on one big wetland system, and we have a picture of that, and we'll show you.
As one gets filled, the other ones are gonna get wetter. It's kind of a race to the sky when it comes to when the houses are built.
Yeah.
That's kind of where I'm going with this, is that, you might have a wetland over here that, historically was wet, dry, wet, dry, wet, dry, which is the difference between a wetland and a pond. And then you build adjacent to it, bring in a bunch of fill, bring in a bunch of, impervious surface, and then suddenly the wetland is no longer a wetland, it's a pond permanently. Like, you've now changed the biology and the function of the wetland by making it permanently inundated. I've seen that all over the place. So.
And our code really does not address that.
Okay.
It really addresses specific, like, dredge and fill in a wetland or a buffer. and and not if what you do on your site outside of a wetland impacts an adjacent one.
So I want to recognize that I think Bob and then Bliss, I believe that was the order, have questions, and then Alex.
Yeah, item 6 on that first page, Ginger, doesn't that cover what Wendy was just talking about? And, you don't know? Cumulative impacts of proposed developments on wetland systems in combination with other developments?
Yeah, the issue with that is, let me pull up the picture of Daytona Park Estates, and then this would be a great example of cumulative impacts and how amazingly difficult it would be to implement this. So here, I was hoping I'm going to zoom a little bit. Okay, so this is just a block in Daytona Park Estates. And so in 2003, you can see, are you seeing this too? Okay,
Share
hold on,
screen.
let me see if I can. Now are you seeing that? Okay, okay. So this is a 2003 aerial with the rough wetland boundary, right? Not delineated or field verified, but here's the wetland boundary. And these are just a bunch of single-family lots, previously platted lots. So this picture is in 2023, and you can see over the years, each of these houses has come in to, the owners have come in to build a house. Well, a couple things here. One is that each of those houses had a wetland impact, right? And so they would have received a permit from us, but because it was a previously platted lot, there are development rights on that lot. They have the right to build a house on it. We have to issue a permit for those impacts. We certainly try to minimize the impacts as much as possible and then mitigate.
Okay, one quick point. I have to make this point. Again, this is a vested subdivision. So each one of those parcels has a development right. If this was greenfield without any existing vested right, if someone came in and proposed to do that type of subdivision right there, we would say no. And those wetlands would be preserved and protected. So new greenfield developments are being held to a higher standard than what you're seeing for these vested lots, because we do not want to have a resulting taking of that land, because at some point, it passed our requirements from the 1976 subdivision that it was open and passable, and 25% of the lots were actively for sale.
Thank you.
Right. So I just want to make one other point. So there is the avoidance and minimization criteria, right? Where now you're looking at one lot, and people have a right to build a house, and they've been allowed to build a house. The second part
Is now exiting.
we should get back to at some point is the DEP exemption for fill in a wetland under 4,000 square feet. So these lots are exempt from DEP permitting and mitigation. And so when you talk about is a minimum standard important, and should the county have standards that are different than DEP, this is the kind of thing to be thinking about. Under DEP standards, no mitigation would happen, and the cumulative impacts of what's going to happen here is this wetland won't exist after all these lots are developed, right? But even though we have that provision, the number 6 provision, because these owners have rights, we are not able to say, and I mean, how fair would that be to say to them, this guy, okay, if you were here, 1521 is okay, but oh, you know what, 1535, cumulatively, it's starting to add up, you can't have a house, right? So the intent is certainly to look at cumulative impacts. The reality is that that's very difficult to do.
And Jameson, Bliss, okay. Bob, then Bliss.
Real quick, that's what leads me to ask the question, would it make more sense to have a set of guidelines for those remaining lots that are like Deltona Park Estates and our guidelines for the new stuff? Because just what you're saying is there's all kinds of conflicts that you get into, because these lots were not developed under the same standards that we've been developing under since, like, what, 1982?
88.
88?
Yeah.
I know it was a while ago.
A long time ago.
82.
Well, the minimum
83.
standard was 88.
Bottom line
yeah.
is we've been very conscientious about our developments ever since then, and it would seem to me to be a lot easier if there were exceptions for these non-conforming and conforming vested properties. Because what you said is so.
Well, there are.
The
I
wetland's gonna
mean-
be gone. Yeah, but why bother staff with it? It's
Oh,
gonna
you
be
mean,
gone.
so you mean don't require a permit and don't require mitigation? 'Cause
Don't
it's,
require anywhere near the same thing on these that you do when we're out there developing a new piece of property. Just a thought that, because I know you get tied up in this stuff all the time. And it's, to me, kind of senseless because it's not gonna be a wetland when it's all said and done, no matter what we do. It's a sin that we committed 50 years ago or 60 years ago. And, let's work on no net loss of what we've had since 1982 and give up on the stuff that's, it's non-conforming.
Let's,
but it's vested.
circle back to this discussion after we get through everything, because I think now we're just receiving examples and information. I would comment, though, the process as it is now, because there's flexibility built into it, it's probably not going to please everybody 100%, but everybody has a chance to appeal. Bliss, you've been waiting a long while.
Mine's more of a question. Segueing off of Wendy's, you have a piece of property, it has some wetland on it. The adjacent property, that property, that wetland may continue across several other properties. It was my understanding that that would be governed by St. John's Water Management. Is that not so? That you cannot impact another wetland?
Go ahead.
So, depending on the type of development would depend on if the Water Management District or the Florida Department of Environmental Protection would be doing the state permitting, right? So there are state permitting rules, the Environmental Resource Permit, the ERP. Sometimes the district implements it, sometimes DEP does. So depending on the type, but regardless of the agency, they're looking at the application in front of them. Now, they do look, and Tyler or Bill may be able to speak to it a little bit better. They do look at secondary impacts, but they're not, you don't have any information about the parcel next door necessarily, except what you can find on aerials. What comes to you as the reviewer is that parcel and those improvements. If it's a contiguous wetland, like say this is, they'll at least know that it exists. And in our case, we have that half-acre exemption. Well, in this, this wetland is more than a half acre, so it's not exempt. So every impact requires a permit and mitigation. But they're not necessarily looking at, if I build this 1521, do I have to mitigate for the fact that now the wetland that was here is less valuable? They're not looking at that necessarily. I don't know, Tyler, if you have a different answer to that.
The comment I was going to add earlier, but we kind of moved forward, is in terms of protecting adjacent wetlands, what St. John's does look at during the permitting process is if we were doing anything that would lower the groundwater table near the edge of the property. So projects where we would actually be making an alteration to lower the groundwater table, either we're making substantial grade changes downward where we're just going to cause the drainage of the groundwater superficially, or we put in a wet pond and we have a canal or some other positive discharge drainage where we can control the normal water level of the pond below what the normal groundwater level would be. And when you do that, you can dewater a wetland and alter the size of the wetland and negatively affect its hydraulic function, so on and so forth. And so St. John's does look at and consider those impacts, and if we propose a wet pond that's kind of remotely near where it could impact, they will have us look at a drawdown curve analysis and ensure that we aren't effectively changing the quality of that wetland.
But does it go in the other direction too?
No, like if you're filling.
Yeah, we're talking about drawdown, but are we also talking about filling up, permanently filling up?
To Wendy's earlier question.
I think, yeah, I was gonna say, I think within stormwater review, there's requirements on our pre to post development site impacts to adjacent properties, and we analyze that. But I think there might be differences in opinion between your opinion and my opinion on whether filling the site affects the adjacent wetland in itself. Filling the site over here doesn't inherently change the groundwater here. Changing how water routes through the ground over here is what could change the groundwater over here. Raising a site does not necessarily raise the groundwater in the site, depending on how the stormwater is managed. If you have a wet pond that's dewatering in the center of the site and discharging to a canal, you could still raise the site, but effectively lower the groundwater table through the whole site. So just not to say that it can't raise, but it doesn't just inherently cause that impact. So, but St. John's does look at the dewatering effects. They don't look at fill.
So one way. Alex?
It's my understanding that there is some regulation in place that developers or developments can't change the hydrology, and like it's, I guess, locally it's talked about as like you can't flood out your neighbors kind of or a regulation there. So isn't that kind of getting at the changing hydrology? Ideally, like if we're changing, let's say, like a marsh land to a pond because of a development, isn't that kind of violating that issue?
So the rules about the timing and the volume of stormwater that can leave the site, or water that can leave the site, are in the stormwater regulations and in the St. John's and DEP ERP permitting process. So our wetland code doesn't necessarily address that, although when you're doing a development, the engineers have to demonstrate that the pre-post hydrology is, within whatever the St. John's requirements are. If on a specific site, you're now saying, you're directing, okay, I'm collecting the stormwater from this development and I'm directing it into this wetland, and that's going to be my storage, and that's going to change that wetland from, whatever it is right now, some sort of freshwater marsh, into an open water system, then that is a wetland alteration. There's a loss of function, and there would potentially be mitigation for that. Now, in our review, we do not encourage or I don't want to say we don't permit it, because it could happen, I guess, but we don't see that happening. Like specifically, this is our plan. We're going to grab that stormwater, we're going to flood this wetland, and this is going to be our storage. We're not approving that. We don't feel like that's a minimization of impacts. Now, whether that happens as a result of development on one site and impacts on another site, we're not necessarily reviewing that or capturing that. It should be being captured in the stormwater review, but we don't, we're not stormwater engineers, so we don't necessarily know that that's not happening. Does that make sense?
Before.
It makes sense, but it also seems like a vision. And I will say, though, that this is, at least in our internal process, because on commercial projects or subdivisions, we have a team approach to the review, right? There is this staff review team, and so we all individually review the plans and develop our comments based on our own individual codes, and then we have a technical staff review meeting where, Todd might say, okay, well, they have to lose this lot or do this thing because of whatever, and then, our engineers can say, well, to meet our code, they need this many parking spaces. So we do have that approach where, Todd could say, hey, I'm worried about this stormwater pond. It looks like it's going to, impact this wetland. Those conversations happen, but we don't all look at everybody's section of the code and know it the way we know our own sections.
I'm going to recognize.
Yeah, a few things. One, to wrap up this point, because we've talked about that concept, stormwater into wetlands, a lot recently in terms of flood mitigation for hurricanes. So you have some cities who have systems where they have easements over impacted wetlands, because you will have to get a permit for impacts, where they pump water directly into the wetland to lower canal storage and things like that pre-storm so that it has more volume. My understanding is that unless it's treated and the receiving wetland has capacity within its class, they will treat that as an impact, and you will mitigate fully as if you're getting rid of the wetland, but it will remain on site. But that's at the state level. So local government haven't seen that much. For this example, going back, I wanted to ask, they have vested rights, certainly, but they still have to comply with land development regulations like setbacks and coverage. And so is there anything that's been looked at in terms of, in this area or in a zoning classification saying you have a right to develop, but you can't bring over a certain amount of fill onto a lot? Like if you're going to build a house, it has to be on stilts or stacked?
The only thing we do is, in some cases, we make them do stem walls to try to lessen that impact, so there's not as much fill going in there. But as far as the setbacks and stuff, I don't think we.
And the difficulty here, I'll just say, and it's not true everywhere, but here they're also on well and septic, so they have to fill for their septic drain field, and they have to clear and fill for where their well is going to go. So these are particularly problematic.
Yeah.
1 foot above the county road.
Yeah.
So my quick question, I think, kind of also flows, no pun intended, with Jessica's, and that is, when we're talking about adjacent wetlands, what happens at the border between county and cities? We water knows no boundary, and we talked about minimum standards in our last meeting and the applicability in the cities.
Help me out. I'm not sure how to answer that.
So you'll do a plan review as county, and you can iron out concerns. What if the concerns extend into a wetland that is in unincorporated Volusia County and also is in the city of Ormond Beach, for example, or the city of Holly Hill?
So we're looking at a development that's within the county, but the adjacent parcel is in the city. I don't know. I don't have a good answer for that, or I can't even think of a.
Yes.
Yeah.
No,
That's true.
the land area could be within 2, but the development's incurring in 1, and.
I mean, we do have with some of the cities, this interlocal agreement where if it's right on the border, then they review them too. But, the cities
Okay.
are not really reviewing wetland permits. So, yeah.
The county could.
Yeah.
Got it. Thank you. So it's not entirely on its own, but it's not. And I don't know which of you was first. Okay.
So I was going to kind of jump back to the Daytona Park Estates discussion that we were having. We have some 70s and some 60s and some older, effectively paper plat subdivisions, or subdivisions that were paper plats, and then we got some roads in. And so they're grandfathered at this point. How many lots do we have? I mean, how many of these are out there? Is it thousands, or is this? It's a lot.
It's thousands. Now, we do have, in some of the ones that are true paper plats where they're not open and accessible and they don't meet the vesting criteria, we don't have to issue building permits on those. And we have had in the past, and hopefully the council will continue to support a small lot acquisition program where some of those folks that bought buy a piece of Florida or whatever, and they're stuck with these parcels they can't get to, that we buy those and try to block people from getting enough lots together that they could potentially do something with them. But there are thousands out there like this where they actually are vested.
And I mean, I guess
they're not all in wetland areas, of course, but
well, and that would be kind of my question is, I wonder how many acres of wetlands we're talking about. To some extent, in my career, I've come to form the idea, and this may be just my own interpretation from my seat, but that once the lots are platted and the rights are vested and it's permittable, the battle's gone. Like, if there's a wetland there that we didn't deal with the mitigation of the future impacts to it correctly, that the code doesn't support us preventing the impacts. And I think that's what you guys are finding here and what you're
Right.
sharing is that we don't really have a good mechanism to stop some of these things. And I'm assuming this is being brought up because it's, a conversation of do we want to do something to stop them, or is it just to kind of let us know that, hey, there is this part that there's probably not ever going to be a solution to?
Yeah, so the reason we used this as an example was to talk about the difference between local requirements and state requirements. And this is a perfect example of the fact that we have to permit these impacts. We have an obligation to these owners to let them use the land that they purchased. But that doesn't mean it should go without mitigation, right? And those impacts have not been mitigated. So this is a net loss if there's no mitigation required. And so while we pretty much, I don't want to say we give up the battle on avoidance and minimization, and this is an extreme case where there are lots, like on the entire wetland. A lot of times it's, like maybe the wetland continues onto a larger tract or something, right? And they're eating away at one side of the wetland. So we haven't given up on avoidance and minimization, but it's really, this one is tough, right? They're going to get a
there's not a
house.
lot
There's
you
not
can
going to be much left. But and at least in our mind, that brings up the importance of the fact that we have an ordinance that requires mitigation for these impacts. It's even though they're likely to, we can't stop them, they should be mitigated.
And just to address the concern that Tyler brought up about the fact that you may have vested development rights out in the middle of nowhere and it's kind of a fait accompli, we can utilize Volusia Forever for acquisition of those properties. Well, even large lot, but the big problem we run into is ownership. Because when you have that many disaggregated ownerships trying to get one and the other aspect is valuation. And this is something we've seen even from our own county council members is like, that's just land out there in the middle of nowhere. Why are you paying $40,000 an acre? It shouldn't be worth that. Well, you're not necessarily paying for what you're seeing out there. You're paying for what you could see out there. And that's a very difficult point to get across.
Yeah, and I think that's ultimately where I really like the idea of using the county funding. That I'm really proud to be one of the voters that voted, hey, let's continue the program Volusia Forever. Let's continue to fund buying and setting aside the land for conservation. I think that, trying to save this through a permitting process is, we're asking you guys to go do battle to the death with people, basically, and I don't think that it's going to get us the results that we positively want to see. So I still am curious how many acres, if there is information on how many acres of platted lots do we have that we think are in wetlands that could be impacted, because, and I don't know if,
That's one of the bigger wetlands in that subdivision anyway. Most of them are small. A lot of them are under a half acre. Like, it's real patchy out there, but every block has almost at least one small wetland out there.
yeah, and I know Daytona Park Estates is particularly a good example of this.
Yeah.
And if that's the only example that we have, though, that's really the problem, then my mind would be that, hey, we do have a pretty good process that deals with all of our developments for the last 40 years, and we've really refined it a lot. This is one of those situations that we're glad that our code addresses now, and it's unfortunate that it didn't then. And that's just my thoughts.
John, you put your name up and then you took it down?
Just saw you recognize that. So how much of this can be handled in the new revision of the comprehensive land use plan? Because I can remember when you first came into the rural areas and you limited densities, for example, through the comprehensive land use plan. Who's to say we can't come in and limit the rights on these properties like you did in rural areas?
Yeah, I mean, we could, right? We could propose that, and the council could do that. We can't do it until October 1st of 2024 now because we're limited. But
Can some of this be handled by the comprehensive land use?
it could be. I think what we hear from the development community, and I think we're going to hear from the attorney, is that these sorts of lots that have an actual vested right, if you took away the right to build a home, that would be considered a taking, and the county would be liable for that.
With the comprehensive land
That can,
My densities went,
that's still a take, I mean, if it's vested, it's still a taking. If it's undeveloped land and you have no expectation of development under a guaranteed permit, they have a policy discretion to change. Right, which would be a taking, if you have a vested subdivision. Arguably, I say, I know. For Chris, we'll caveat
No,
that.
you're correct.
Yeah. I think if you,
so you can limit, I mean, if this is a designated wetland,
so the comp plan question is stronger. If you were to change the zoning out here, you would just get a non-conforming lot letter and say, the lot was platted before, it didn't have common owners in the past 30 years, still let me develop, and the county would say, okay. If you had a vested subdivision and you changed the future land use to conservation, you are making a land use attorney very happy.
Billable hours, is that what you?
well,
Oh.
one follow-up then with, I don't know what this sensitivity of this land or how great of a wetland this is, and I know that the more you lose over time creates a bigger impact, but how important of a wetland is that as it stands?
Do you know what its like functional score would have been?
I would just
then.
also remind, since John wasn't here last month, that our overarching goal in all of this is no net loss of wetlands, or in function, in area or in function in the county.
So before this wetland was fragmented the way that it has been as houses have developed, it probably had a pretty high functional score, right? And that's what we look at. What is the function of the wetland for, wildlife, water, et cetera? I mean, I don't know what.
I'm not sure what it would have scored, but even as it sits in 2003, there's houses across the street, across 10th Avenue there. I don't know if where I live, I have wetlands on both sides of my house during the storms. We got 27 inches of rain in Smyrna Beach. My house didn't flood, but I have natural wetlands all the way around me. That's the difference. Man-made wetlands don't hold the water the way natural ones do. So the more you fill the more natural ones, that's the difference. And that's where the state differs from what we're looking at. They're looking at more groundwater, drinking water, things like that, whereas we're looking at the functionality of the entire system.
Wendy, oh, sorry, John? Okay, thank you, sorry. Wendy?
Well, I want to respond a little bit, but then get to my other question. And we do have reports from homeowners, homeowners of older homes in Daytona Park Estates who report that they, flood on a regular basis now as newer homes have been built adjacent to them because they have lost that wetland function of stormwater storage. So that's happened. I was just going to come back to funding. So, yes, we have Volusia Forever. And I brought this up last time briefly, asked about this mitigation fund, which I now know is called the Environmental Improvement Trust Fund. And so my question is, so we continue permitting impacts, require people to pay in, the money sits in a literal bank. When and where and how do we spend that money? And can that money be used as matching for Volusia Forever? Can that money be spent without a Volusia Forever application? Can that money how does one, as a homeowner, as a property owner, or as a city or another entity, tap into that fund for the protection of wetlands elsewhere?
Before you answer, very good question, and Clay was wanting to say something, and I don't know if he needs to say it before we move on to this mitigation.
Well, I'm going to just complicate everything with the discussion about Daytona Park Estates, because it's not just the filling of the wetlands, it's also the base flood elevations that are having to be put out there so that the properties meet the National Flood Insurance Program. So you have a kind of a double whammy in that you have lots that are vested that can be built upon, and we cannot restrict it without infringing on property rights. And so when we they come in for building permit, we make them bring in a bunch of fill and bring the house up higher. And we've attempted to try and mitigate that with stem wall construction in lieu of slab on grade and those types of things. But this is a prime example of when you build in an antiquated subdivision that doesn't have sufficient infrastructure to address it. Because if you look at the newer subdivisions that have the adequate infrastructure, those issues are abated through the design of the stormwater system, which can be improved upon as well.
And I said my question or comment ties into Wendy's next point on the Volusia Forever. I'm gonna put on the Volusia Forever hat. Part of what we review as Volusia Forever when it comes through is one of the criteria is, are there highly functioning or wetlands on site that with mitigation can be increased to highly functioning wetlands? And so I wanted to clarify that the funds that are collected through wetland alteration permits, does part of that go to land management so that then when we buy the Volusia Forever land that we've said has wetlands on it that can be restored to high functioning, is that tied in?
Okay, so that's a great question. That's a long answer. So there's specific language in the code about this mitigation fund and how it can be spent. The funds have to be deposited in this fund, Environmental Improvement Trust Fund, to purchase, improve, create, restore, manage, and replace natural habitat. Leaving aside the actual value that people have to pay, we should talk about that because it's really, really low. We have the ability to use the funds for this. In the past, the way we have used these funds almost exclusively is for the small lot acquisition program. So we have used wetland mitigation funds to purchase lots that have wetlands on them to prevent the development of those lots. That is it's been through the Volusia Forever program, but not the same way that people apply to Volusia Forever for a larger acquisition, right? So in the past, and I think with council's approval, what we'll continue to do is actually target those owners of these antiquated subdivisions, send them out letters to say, if you have this lot and you want to sell it, we will only pay the assessed value, right? They're really small. So that is what these monies have been used for in the past. Currently, in this current budget year, there's about $177,000 in the fund. So you're not buying anything big, right? You're not buying Farmton or, right? You're not buying Daytona Park Estates probably either. The other thing that we have used funds for in small ways, and we do have a plan, we have actually a person on staff that we've hired recently part-time to help us with this, are restoration projects. So if someone else in the county has a project going on and we can do some little portion of wetland restoration on that project, we can use the funds for that, like a stormwater pond that's not vegetated that could be vegetated. So there are ways to use the money. We have not in the past provided grants to other people the way that we do with the tree fund. I don't know that it's specifically prohibited by the ordinance language, but it hasn't been enough money really to make that one of the things we did do. But we have used some of the money too to participate in grants. So like it'd be a larger grant project like one we did with Bethune-Cookman University, where they were creating doing a wetland creation project, and we contributed plant material out of the wetland fund. So those are some of the ways that we've used the money. It's not huge dollars, and it's variable, right? It depends on what applications are coming in throughout the year to know, what money is available for the next year. So.
Alex, you had a comment on this point?
And this is kind of goes against, I think, what you typically see in Volusia, but in certain areas that are especially vulnerable to like storm surge and things like that, stilting is appropriate. Is that something that Volusia's ever thought about to prevent fill in wetlands, or thinking kind of Daytona Park Estates, if people filling and putting houses down is kind of changing hydrology, and if we put those houses on stilts, we're lessening that hydrologic change.
Yeah, so we haven't, we can't necessarily compel someone to choose a specific type of construction. Now, on the high hazard areas of the coast, then, there are some specific requirements. If you're in the CCCL, you have to build on piers and some of those sorts of things that have to frangible bottom floor, all of that. We, as part of our avoidance and minimization discussion with property owners, we talk about alternative construction methods. Can you do something like a stem wall construction? Can you, do pier construction? we can't necessarily say you must do it, but we attack that from the avoidance and minimization perspective. Now, these lots in Daytona Park Estates, you could put all of them on stilts. They're still going to have to fill for their septic tanks. And so, you know, at some point, like you guys were talking about, are we, you know, spending a lot of energy fighting against something that, you know, that maybe not as much return as in some other areas. So we do try to convince people to use these less impactive construction methods. Can't necessarily require. There's nothing in the code that says we can require them to do that.
Thank you, Ginger.
Okay, so I'm going to back up. So I put that wetland fund stuff at the bottom. So the other section of the wetland code that really gets to avoidance and minimization is in our mitigation section. And I will say that one of the things we've talked about is reordering. Regardless of if the standards change, we think there's some reordering that should happen. Avoidance and minimization, in my mind, should have its own section. It mostly occurs here in the mitigation section. And to me, that's where you get if you haven't avoided and minimized. But it says here, basically in order of priority, you should avoid the impact altogether by not taking the action, and then minimize it by limiting the degree, and then rectify, and that's where you get to the mitigation. And then the rest of this section really talks about what does mitigation mean. So we do have you know, some opportunities to maybe better define or set some parameters about what avoidance and minimization is like. This is just, you know, us telling you kind of what we have now and what we do now. And I don't know if you want to have more discussion about this section before we move on to the next question you had, which was comprehensive plan policies.
Before we move to the comp plan, you said, let's talk about fees. Can we talk about fees?
Oh, sure. So we brought this up last time. Of course, our code is out of date in terms of mitigation, right? So the state has the required mitigation method. It's called UMAM. And for wetland impacts, there's also a state permit. Those impacts are typically handled through that process. People buy bank credits. If it's a wetland impact that's exempt from state permitting for whatever reason, it meets one of the state's exemptions, like those DPE lots that are less than 4,000, or docks and seawalls that are exempt. We require mitigation, and we use the UMAM to find that functional loss, right? So how great is the wetland now? How great is the wetland after the impact? And that functional loss, that change in function, we require mitigation. Our mitigation price is $1 per square foot. That's for wetland impacts, and that's for buffer impacts. They go up by the CPI, but at $1, the CPI is a couple of cents. The county only goes up to the next dollar when it's $1 more, right? So it's still $1 because it doesn't go to $1.05 and then next year go to $1.09. It stays $1 till it hits 2. Hasn't hit 2, right? That's 100% inflation. So it's $1. So if somebody impacts 1,000 square feet of wetland buffer, they're paying $1,000. So you can see why we have $177,000 in the wetland fund. And I think we could argue whether that represents no net loss, right? Because what are you going to do with that $1,000? So there you go. That's the fee discussion. It's $1.
That's kind of shocking. I mean, we know so much more now about the services that wetlands provide to us, and as Wendy's brought up several times, we can pay for something on the front end or we can pay for it on the back end, but we're going to pay for it. And we do have to be flexible, and we do have to offer mitigation. I understand that, and I'm for that, but it seems $1 a square foot is ridiculous, especially given the increase in land value in our county.
So I'm open to this discussion. I have two questions and a question and a comment. If you are not meeting tree preservation on the site and you're impacting wetlands, are you paying tree removal fees as well within that? Okay. And those are, I think, higher, honestly, than the wetland impact fees by quite a bit. The state mitigation, I think the go-by that we say is that it's $250,000 an acre for wetland mitigation. So that's, if I did math right, probably not, it's like almost $6 per square foot at the state level. And so, one, depending on if it's exempt or not, you're combining them, right? You're paying both. And so part of it is for,
No, we don't.
oh, we defer if we pay them. Yes, that's correct. Which is a good point. So the state is at 6. So maybe that's something that we look at. 1 to 6 is very different. But I also wanted to see what the tree fees would be. But you can impact wetlands and still meet your tree preservation on site and not have those fees. Right?
Correct.
There's not always going
Right.
to be both.
Is the square footage used, you talked about UMAM, do you make an adjustment on the square footage based on the UMAM scores, or is it just
Yes.
so the 1,000-foot impact could be 500 square feet of area, it could be 2,000 square feet of area, depending on what the impact looks like?
No, the impact is gonna be whatever they say is on the plan, or whatever we deem it is on a
It's the
restoration.
dollar that could change.
Yeah.
So for instance, on a buffer, if you go from a totally natural wetland buffer to a totally paved wetland buffer, that's 100% loss. You'd pay the full dollar. If you went from mowed to paved, the loss is different, and there's a table that we use. So maybe you only pay 50 cents per square foot because you're going from, the loss of function is less, right?
This is where answering the question Jessica answered about $250,000 an acre. My eyes were a little bit in the back of my head going, oh my gosh, that's such a difficult question because of that part of it, because of the impact.
Right, so it's the functional loss that you have to, the dollar is the maximum. It could be less if your functional loss is less.
And so we're starting at about 1/6 of what a mitigation bank credit.
Could you speak into the mic, please?
Sorry. So it sounds like we're at about 1/6 of outside mitigation costs. And it depends on basin. Some credits are quite a bit cheaper than that. Okay.
I've been inching. It's like now or wait. The conversations have primarily focused around residential development, okay? So when you think about a residential lot, these fees might not seem that much. But as Jessica just spoke about, and then I just wanted to, after our last meeting and then in preparation for this meeting and reading over the material prior to, it just struck me that, most of our conversations are based on residential. Well, I'm the president of the Southeast Volusia Manufacturing and Technology Coalition. My job is to go out and shine the light on Volusia County. Specifically, we focus on New Smyrna Beach, Edgewater, and Oak Hill as a great place to come live and do business. And, it's all about creating jobs. High-tech, advanced manufacturing, value-added jobs. Help diversify our tax base and take the burden off of the residents. And with that, we are promoting, and in all of our advertisements, we are promoting our wonderful quality of life, our waterways, our environmental, our rails to trails, everything that we hold near and dear. But when you get into talking about, adding ordinances, increasing regulations, and you consider all the different state agencies, government agencies that have our regulations, and we're wanting to add in this much more to the top. It just struck me that a lot of times we may not, and I don't think, we've heard a little bit today, about public benefit, but I don't really think we are considering the economic impact on our communities. I mean, we want to have sustainable, environmentally resilient communities, but I think we also need to take into account when we are proposing this addition, have we evaluated the economic impact of it? And I'm dealing with companies that are looking to come here and buy 60 acres, 100 acres, you know, many acres. I'm actually working with one now that's looking at land that would be in a, we call it Norma area. And we're in the guidelines for today, further down, we're proposing increasing that 50-foot buffer to a 100-foot buffer. Well, I can tell you right now, that'll kill that job. I mean, that'll kill that company. That company will leave and go to another county or another state. So this is where, you know, we need jobs for our residents. We need affordable housing for our residents. And of course, we want to protect our environment, but we don't, and we have a room full of environmental staff, but we don't have any economic staff in here to talk about the balance. And, you know, as a person who's been dealing with this, especially, you know, more so lately, and then some of the other meetings we've been going to throughout the county, I just really think we need to be talking about the health of our economic community as well as our environmental community for a sustainable, resilient community. And I don't think we are spending enough time or evaluating, I don't even know if we have evaluated the economic impact of some of these additional regulations. I'd just like to bring that into the conversation. I think we just need more balance.
I think it's very good to bring that up, and it's a fair question, but I'm not sure that it is part of the remit of this committee where we're supposed to look at what the environmental ordinances can accomplish for us. I love the idea of diversifying our economy. It's, you know, construction has really gone down. Sorry about that, guys, but it used to be everything was construction and very low-level service jobs, and that's part of why we have an affordable housing, crisis. So I love the idea of more residents. But I think we have to balance that with, when we take away a wetland, it's gone forever. And part of what people are going to want when they come here is knowing that their number one investment, which is their home, is going to be as safe as it can possibly be. They know Florida has hurricanes and alligators, but they may not be aware of the flooding issues unless they're looking at Miami, where they're having all kinds of sunny day flooding and septic system issues. I don't know how we get to the economic. I get the economic newsletter, the Volusia economic scene, and read that. I don't know how we get to quantifying what these impacts are in terms of real estate and jobs. I think that's kind of beyond this committee.
But when we take our recommendations to the county council is going to be looking at it in its entirety for our whole community. And so I'm not proposing doing away with wetlands. In fact, anybody coming here is going to have to abide with the codes that we have now. I'm just saying that we already have this many codes and regulations. I'm saying we have this many state and federal county organizations with their regulations. When we add this 100-foot buffer versus a 50-foot buffer, we've just cost our community jobs. And because we're always talking about the residential, the residential, the residential, the residential. And I'm saying, I'm proposing to you that if we aren't careful, there are going to be unintended economic impacts to our commercial and industrial development area. We don't spend a lot of time talking about preserving industrial areas, you know. And the unincorporated areas of Volusia County have and could stand to use more industrially zoned properties. And the property I'm talking about that's located in the Norma is an industrially zoned area. So it's all within the guidelines, already permitted zoning, but this is where adding this additional regulation from 50 foot to 100 foot can be a job killer. And I'm just presenting that as an example of something that I don't even think this committee would be thinking about because we're so focused on residential.
So you are sort of moving into the agenda item of discussing whether we whether we have stronger protections in Norma and Eco.
Well, this is like didn't know whether to mention it now or later.
Okay.
So it comes up here and it's moves on down to the next section. Yes.
And Wendy had something to say.
But I thought I'd go ahead and do it now. That way everybody's thinking about it as we move forward. Thank you for hearing me out.
I really appreciate you bringing that up. I appreciate the perspective. And I think back to, a few months ago when we were talking about LID, and others in the room said, oh, this only applies to residential subdivisions. And I pushed back and said, no, LID applies to everything, including big commercial properties. I have been wanting to embrace all types of development, commercial, industrial, all of that in addition to residential. So I share your concern that we do seem to continue using examples of residential. I would also say that some of the solutions that we could explore don't have to cost more. I don't think that simply changing a buffer width from 50 to 100 is a solution. It can be a solution, but there are lots of other ideas, even within the toolkit of LID, that could allow a big manufacturing, I'm just going to call it a big block sitting on the landscape, whether that's a warehouse or a distribution center or a manufacturing facility, complete with a parking lot. Like, you can have a parking lot that is pervious. There are lots of different designs for pervious lots. Does it cost more? Sometimes maybe, but not necessarily. You could have a building that is not just a cube, but that has a configuration that actually allows for runoff into protected wetlands that become a beautiful part of the campus for that facility, that the employees of that facility now enjoy working at, because when they take their breaks, they can go for a walk around this beautiful boardwalk where they can see wildlife. And so you get longer term employees because they're working in this incredible facility. We don't have to build, the cheapest thing possible. The ugliest thing possible isn't always the cheapest thing possible, I think, is what I mean to say. And so I guess I would hope that they would come and say, hey, we want to be environmentally sensitive and responsible here. How can we do this facility in, all the ways that we need to do it to meet the functions, and get creative about it. Maybe I'm just a dreamer, but I think that it's possible, and absolutely we should be inviting those companies to come in and sit down with us and figure out how to have a win-win for everybody.
I'll just say that I think a lot of the companies that are coming, looking to come to Florida are already thinking that way, because they, as I said, we are using the quality of life and our location in this, environmentally eco-sensitive area as a draw. So I think they are already coming with that in mind.
I think it was Bob, then Tyler, and would we like to have a break right after that? Okay, so now is it Bob? You just put your name down, you're going to speak? For just a moment. Okay, and then Tyler, and then we have a little break.
I I'm glad whoever that was didn't scream at me just then a while ago. But I'm going to pass on the pontification. I couldn't agree with Bliss more. One of the things that has lacked since the 1985 Growth Management Act was enacted and all the comprehensive plans across the state have been written is balance. They all lack balance. And if we could focus on that as we move forward, I think we can make some great strides. But we've got to balance it. You know, it comes right down to it. You know, I have just as much right to be on the planet and take some space up as the salamander. We just have to figure out how to balance this out and not make it so onerous that we don't have affordable housing, that the good jobs go elsewhere, you know, that we end up with more homeless people on the street. That's the unintended consequence of not having balance. So I told you I'd cut it short. I'm doing it.
Thank you, guys. I was the offender earlier, too. So I agree with what Bliss was saying in overall concept, that the idea of increasing the cost or the difficulty of the process for us to develop commercial and industrial lands is one that is a realistic outcome that could come from changing these regulations. And we can look at communities throughout Florida who have done that and see that they become more residentially heavy. They lose their tax base, they have less services, their quality of life declines for the residents, and the general outcome is they don't have the money to take care of the lands that they have put in conservation, also because they've let their economic engine die. And so I see a bigger picture that there is a synergy, there is a balance that has to be found, and we do have lands that are set aside as industrial, and some of those are in our environmentally sensitive areas, and we may need to look at what are ways that the industries going in can more compatibly develop without impacting the wetlands, but also I don't think that's necessarily as burdensome as increasing our buffers or some of the other things that are being proposed. I actually find that we have a very good level of higher standard than the state and of our neighbors already, and if we increase it further, we're probably just going to see more to the north, to the west, northwest, where there's vacant land.
Jessica talk. I actually would like to speak to that too.
I would say it's a closing comment, and I agree that we need to look at economic impacts of what we propose, and I think that we will, and we'll definitely have those discussions. I'm going to pick a little bit on the salamander reference, because I can name many species of salamander that are extinct from overdevelopment, but not humans. I think that this is a good discussion. It started with we talk about residential, but we don't talk about commercial or industrial. A suggestion may be that we treat them differently. That typical residential development is, you know, more indicative of urban sprawl. We need to be more careful on where that's located and how it plays out. Commercial nodes based on master planning should be in, you know, urbanized areas and things like that, so that there are less environmentally sensitive lands, or there's different criteria there. So I think that both points matter, of course, and that's why we're all here and why we bring the different perspectives. But I don't think it has to be, we're going to change nothing for anything. It could be, here's some increased protections for residential in these areas, here's what we're going to do with industrial or commercial, and that is the kind of balance that I would like to see.
And now it's Bliss depriving us of our break. Go ahead, Bliss.
I'll be really quick. Just,
We lost sound on the stream.
thank you. Sorry about that.
Hang on 1 second, Bliss. Jesse, can you hear me?
Yes, now I can.
Okay.
To follow up on what Jessica was saying, is the property that is in unincorporated areas of the county that is already zoned industrial, I think what you were saying applies. But there is so much ag land in the unincorporated areas of Volusia County that could be and need to be zoned industrial for more sustainable community, and we have a lack of industrially zoned land as it is. I think to say that this is where we get into the gray area and the unintended consequences, and so unless you're going to set those aside, I go back to what I said originally, that there's going to be unintended consequences.
I'm a little bit lost, just in the sense that wouldn't that discussion fall under future land use or comp plan and not under our environmental regulations?
I mean, it could be both, right? We could look at changes to the future land use or the zoning requirements, but we could also, you know, one of the things that the council directed of this group is, do we have different standards in our more sensitive areas like Norma and Eco? And so, you know, this idea of graduated protection. So it could be in both. You could have rules in the wetland code that says, you know, if this type of development, then this, or if this type of development, but you're increasing the density or intensity, then this, right? You can tie them together, or you can, you know, deal with some things just in the, you know, in the future land use element alone. I think it's stronger when there's a comp plan policy that then gets incorporated into the land development regulation. And we will talk about that after the break. We have some comp plan policies that probably need to fall into the code.
And she said the magic word, 10 minutes, which will be 10 of 3. So someone wants a court report from me, and my name is Alyssa, only it's not. Somebody in the 305. But I kind of wanted to answer, because what if it's...
Unknown participant is now
Hey,
exiting.
Alyssa, I hope you're doing well. Please send over a court report for Chalin when you have a chance, as she has court tomorrow. So I needed, like, I need...
It's important.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know this person, but I feel for them.
They're going to court tomorrow.
Okay.
Sure, right here, it's fine. Don't put it that way.
Like, it seems like a good one, that's all I'm gonna say.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. That was a perfect example.
Beautiful and everything.
Oh, no, you're sweet. I put on 15 in the last year, and it's frustrating. I'm gonna go to my break.
Before the other day, I thought, live local, even agriculture. And so the information you gave about, well, yeah, you can put it in T1 or T, all that, and I was like,
It's kind of, and every time it comes up, like from a client perspective, they're like, well, just tell them we use live local. We're like, it's a residentially zoned property. It doesn't apply.
but this really sort of heightened my awareness that we're losing commercial and industrial
The inventory, yeah.
which, so then when I read this, I'm like,
He said it's a challenge. Industrial. My answer is, what kind of we designate more commercial and industrial.
we have to. We don't have enough. Okay, so I was talking to a guy this, and if you have something to do,
But looking at conservation acres.
I was talking to a guy who does a lot of business over in Europe, and he was like, we have like, say, a vacant Kmart. He said it's zoned residential. Why can't we turn that into industrial? He goes, you're out of 10,000, 20,000 square foot spaces. He says, why can't we make that? He said, you've already got the parking, you've got the DACA zoning, you've got his spring roll. Why can't we make it industrial? And then, we're trying to bring more industrial, we're trying to build that pipeline. Have some windows so that people can see in and see what's going on and help
The
facilitate.
manufacturing side of things. Well, and so in Daytona, we've had good success at convincing readers that mixed use
Yes,
can include.
I heard you talking about that.
Right, it goes up to smokestack industrial. You can't have that, right? That's not mixed use.
No,
You don't
that's
want
it,
that.
I'm industrial.
Right. So everything but smokestacks are not mixed uses. We've gotten the city to say that's mixed use. You can permit it wherever you permit it. So manufacturing, incubator space, storage, all of those things. We've got the flexibility to do those.
So do you have examples of that in Daytona?
Yeah, so, even in the LCY corridor, if you've got a project coming called West Coast, and so it is Yeah, because honestly, if you're master planning, you know, most of what we get is, you know, we don't want this use beside ours. That's for people who are already there.
Yes.
If they know it's coming, if they buy with the expectation that that's what's planned for the area, it's different. And so you want to buffer it a bit, you want to make it breathe, you want to make it function. But it doesn't have to be a 6-foot maple wall and 50 feet away.
She's not being difficult, it's just the format, right? I couldn't believe it, like, that's my comment.
It's eating up industrial. So we need to designate more. That's the answer.
We do. It's really just eating up commercial and industrial.
Well, we've not had any specific applications for it since it's been introduced. I think that there's a lot of concern right off the bat. Like I said at the chamber, I'm hoping that we can get to our legislative delegation, specifically with Tom Leake and Tom Wright, everybody saying, hey, can we please take a little time out real quick and look, this is what Volusia County and the cities are doing in Volusia County. We're addressing all of the things you're saying. We've already got it in place. Please don't preempt our land use on the commercial industrial because, and I'm not touching on it in a little bit. We 16 cities and the county need to do a quick analysis of what the future demand for jobs based on population and translate that into appropriate quantities of land. So that way we can sit there and say, yes, it's important for affordability. But if you look at this true model of sustainability, which has a balance of economic, natural, and social, we need the economic as well. So therefore, if we have, looking at the 16 cities, number one of the largest employment hubs are located. Holly Hill, along Carswell, along the railroad. Not just, no, you know who's the number one? Metro Electronics. They have over 700.
Pardon me?
folks.
We need to bring people back in.
Cranking out all of
Ding, 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 ding. Someone flash the lights. Hello, hello. At your peril. Hello, hello. Alex is still out. Okay, there we go. Shall we come to order again? Thank you. And Clay, did you have some thoughts that you'd like to share with us?
Yes, the discussion we just had was great because what you're seeing is that issues pertaining to wetlands as well as just overall natural resource protection incorporates a full thing. And if you ever look at any of the planning documents as to what is sustainability, you see they typically have some sort of Venn diagram where you have economic, social, and natural, and where you have a sustainable community is the balance of all three. This group has been given the directive to look at our specific standards. So at this point, I would like to stay true to what the council's direction. Now, that doesn't mean we can't incorporate what has been told to us. I'm going to make sure you're aware of this. We have been and will continue to provide any kind of changes, proposals to VCARD, Volusia Building Industry Association, as well as the Environmental Coalition of Volusia and Flagler Counties and Dream Green, so that way advisory committees outside of this will always have a copy of what's going on. So you will have a full balanced review of whatever changes come out of here. I will also make sure my colleague Cyrus Callum, who oversees our Economic Development Department, is copied with all the things that we're talking about so his staff can take a look at what we're discussing, so that way if there's anything that they see they have concerns about, they can identify them to us.
Fairly Morrissey.
Is now joining.
Lastly, I want to kind of talk about something that is kind of caught fire amongst local governments in all of Florida, and that's that Live Local Act. And the reason why I'm bringing it up, it's going to force cities and counties throughout the state to do an accounting of what they've got in regards to commercial, industrial, and residential lands. If you're not familiar with it, there's three main components. The first component that I think everybody was really happy about is they fully funded the Sadowski Housing Act, and they've put in money that should have been there a long time ago for affordable housing. Everybody supports that. Second, they put in tax exemption for very specific types of affordable housing. Local governments don't always like tax exemption, but because of how well defined it is, it's something I believe all of us can accept. The third issue, which is where you see the local governments are having a considerable amount of consternation, is the preemption on commercial and industrially zoned property. And I want to emphasize zoned, not land use on the future land use map, but on the zoning. And basically, it says to local governments, if someone's coming in with an affordable housing project, and based on at least 40% of the units being affordable, you have to approve them. And you have to give them the highest density you have, and you have to give them the highest building around within 1 mile. That is really negatively impacting local governments who are trying to diversify their employment base, trying to expand beyond that. So I think what we're going to be striving to do is do our mea culpas to the legislature and ask for the preemption to be put on hold if you've got a very good, sound, affordable housing program. And I don't know if anybody's aware, we're doing a good job there. This is a long-winded way of saying that you're going to see local governments drilling down on how much land is needed for their employment goals and making sure that that's clarified. I would like to do that before we start jumping into opening up more areas of the unincorporated Volusia County. Ms. Lammers and I were talking beforehand. She goes, is it inevitable that, basically Volusia County is going to be ag and conservation lands and that's it, and then the rest is all going to be cities? I said, yeah, it may happen. Broward County right now, they've got 15 municipal service districts. That's basically areas that none of the cities wanted, but the rest of it's all within unincorporated is open conservation land or they're limited ag areas. So the short story made is this. We are aware of the concerns of what's happening from the Live Local Act. I was answering several emails to my colleagues in Orange City and Daytona Beach about it. So it will come forward, and I promise you that it's not going to be something that we're going to be ignoring in regards to making sure that we have that balanced growth going forward.
Thank you. Did that provide some good context for everyone to kind of stay focused on our environmental regulations and know that there will be plenty of review? And all of this is all going on within a bunch of moving parts.
Yeah.
The environment and the regulatory moving parts and the economic moving parts. So we just have to do the best that we can to look out for our collective future. Ginger, where are we?
Well, if we're ready, one of the other topics for today was the staff had said, there are some areas that we want to make sure that we're consistent with the comp plan, and you all last time had asked, okay, can we be more specific about that? And so we have some of those examples here, if we're ready to move to that. Okay. So this first example of a comp plan area is in our future land use element. So that element, among many things, defines the natural resource management area, the NORMA, and it talks about that properties in NORMA and in the, bye Bob, in the environmental core overlay are those areas that are most sensitive and should be managed as a system. So there's some language here just about the NORMA and why it was established, and that, you know, basically the intent is that development within that area does not adversely impact quality and quantity of existing resources. So a little background on that, and then what's already required in the NORMA is that there's an environmental impact assessment for developments within that area that has to look at certain things, including wetland protection, trees, etc. This section 2, let me just highlight this real quick, is particularly interesting. It says that proposed activities in NORMA shall avoid adverse impacts to wetlands, etc., except in cases where it can be demonstrated to be in the overriding public interest. And so that is a little bit more strongly worded even than what's in the wetland ordinance that talks about, you know, avoid and minimize. So I wanted to point that out because it relates a lot to our conversation that we've already been having this afternoon.
And Ginger, just going back, last meeting, we talked about the genesis of NORMA and the genesis of ECO. That was very interesting to me, and so NORMA predates some of the technologies that we have currently to look at land. It predates some of the knowledge that we have about the environmental services performed by natural areas. And at the same time, we have certain zonings, I think, tell me if I'm wrong, in our NORMA also that are our legacy. Some of our extractive technologies are also permitted in NORMA. Am I wrong about that, or?
So NORMA is an overlay in the future land use element, and there are every piece of property has both a future land use and a zoning. Hopefully the zoning is compatible with that future land use, and there's a matrix in that future land use element that talks about which zonings are deemed compatible with each type of future land use or could be considered conditionally compatible under some certain circumstances. I have, but I didn't bring, and I really should have, an analysis of what zonings are in NORMA, what future land uses in zonings.
It is on the website, because I know I've looked at it a long time ago.
Okay. Well, no, I mean, like, like we actually looked at the GIS and said, okay, everything that's NORMA, what is its future land use? Are there some that are incompatible? But for the most part, the lands that are in the NORMA overlay are the more rural lands. There are some small numbers of acreage of things like urban medium intensity, et cetera.
But you've got borrow pits and things like that in NORMA.
Well,
yeah?
right.
No?
Well, because exempt excavations are permitted in some of those rural land uses, like forestry resource, and so they borrow pits are only allowed by special exception. There's a whole review process, but yes, and so where that comes into play for wetlands is that you have to have this environmental impact statement, and we have the rules in the exempt excavation section that talks about drawdown of adjacent wetlands, and they have to demonstrate that the project does not have any short-term or long-term negative impacts on the wetlands.
So a stricter requirement.
Yes.
So where I was kind of going with that, thank you for going over NORMA again, and then the environmental core is an overlay as well that came later.
It did. It came later, and it was a GIS mapping exercise to look at our existing conservation lands, county, state, federal, and create interconnected corridors to make those existing conservation lands actually function as an interconnected ecosystem, right? So that did come later, and in many cases, and we can pull it up. I have the mapper pulled up again if we want to look at it. There are many places where land is in both eco and NORMA. Eco is a smaller geographic area, so almost all eco is in NORMA, but the opposite isn't necessarily true. But they're kind of looking, you know, they're
But-
the areas that have been designated as the most sensitive.
And for a variety of reasons, which I think it's important for us to keep in mind, water recharge areas, yes?
Yes.
Flood mitigation areas. Yesterday at the council meeting, we just agreed as a county to sign on with Alachua Conservation Trust to seek a grant that will protect agricultural land through conservation easements that will include, and this is a huge deal, money for land management activities, which will make it much better for the ag landowners to be able to say yes to this. But it's recognition, in great part, we agreed to that because of the flood mitigation potentially that will provide. So when a long time ago, we designated NORMA, then we came through and we designated ECO, and we said there are all these things that are important to the health of our county that are in these areas, and this is why we want to protect them more. As the cities have grown and grown and grown, it seems to me that the value of this land has, in terms of what it provides to us as citizens of this county, has grown greater because it has become, it's under greater pressure. And we can't make more land. We can't make more of that. So, what are there currently, we said that the NORMA was a 50-foot buffer?
Right.
And I don't want to go into buffers yet. I'm sorry, I don't want to derail you there. But you were going through the review of some of the comp plan contradictions or areas where they can be fixed up.
Right. So
I have a question.
Oh.
It's okay. I'm just wondering, can you give me an example of these cases where it could be demonstrated to be an overriding public interest?
Right. So that's why I highlight this, because that's a little more, that's a stronger statement than what is currently in the wetland code that talks about avoidance and minimization. So, but it gets to me, you know, in my mind, and I think this is how Keith and Todd implement it, is the example we talked about, a new subdivision, right? Is an extra lot in that subdivision in the overriding public interest? I don't know, that's a discussion we could have, but is the road that allows the fire truck to access the lots over here in the overriding public interest? You know, I think that's arguably in the public interest, right? Safety, those sorts of things. But I would say that, you know, we don't, I don't know that we take avoidance and minimization all the way to this level that you see in the comp plan, you know, and so that's why we highlight it as an area that's potentially inconsistent. The comp plan language is inconsistent somewhat, I think, to the ordinance language.
Would the Spruce Creek I-95 be the same?
The interchange? Yeah. I'm not going to talk about that interchange on the microphone.
It's a great question, and I was just going to go back to Bliss's remark earlier, is a new manufacturing facility that's going to bring in 300 new jobs in the overriding public interest.
Yeah.
And I think from a drafting policy standpoint, public interest is, you know, it's the same test on if you can use eminent domain. It has to be in the public interest. So that's kind of the quick view of, you know, could the county condemn your land for that purpose? Manufacturing? Probably not. That seems like a stretch, you know. Or exactly, it's a private benefit. Except there have been some on the waterfront. Yeah. And so I think that's the measuring stick, right? So affordable housing, maybe. It's defined in a few places in Florida statute. That'd be really interesting to see. I still think it's weak. Utilities, of course, roads, you know, things like that are the typicals that you would see.
Chris or Clay wanted to say something about that? Okay, your eyes were just lighting up because it's that time of day.
Eminent domain for economic development has been outlawed in the state of Florida since 2006, because the last time it was utilized by a community redevelopment area was Ormond Beach.
Thank you. It was good to get that out there.
So this section goes on to talk about increased natural buffer zones shall be required landward of protected wetlands in the NORMA, and we do that. That is actually codified in the wetland ordinance. It talks about the 50-foot buffer rather than the 25 that exists in other areas. Then, some additional comp plan policies. In the future land use as well, there's a policy that says by 2020, the county shall adopt standards pursuant to the charter to have minimum environmental standards in the eco, to protect eco as a functioning unit. That language has not necessarily been codified in the land development code, in the wetland standard, or in any other, tree, whatever. So that's a place that's potentially inconsistent, right? We haven't been able to get any additional standards that are specifically to eco. Now, we do apply the 50-foot NORMA buffer to eco as well. It's not stated clearly in the code. And then in that same section, so this is policy 1.2.1, then even further, natural shorelines or buffers shall remain established for water bodies. Then removal of submergent, emergent, and floating vegetation shall continue to be limited. This one, 12.1.2.4, says that vertical seawalls and bulkheads along the banks of naturally occurring surface water bodies are limited to instances where severe threat to life or property can be demonstrated. That language isn't necessarily translated into the wetland code. There's some language to that effect in our Indian River Lagoon improvements overlay area, but that's potentially a section that we could could look at adding some language into the wetland code, because the wetland code is where we permit these vertical or armoring, not necessarily vertical, but.
So since I took my dummy pills at lunch, we're looking at comp plan where we need to bring ordinances in to be in alignment with the comp plan, because we established at the beginning that this body doesn't change comp plan. Yeah?
Right, these are existing
Okay.
comp plan policies that are not necessarily consistent with the language in the ordinance.
Or the ordinance isn't consistent with the comp plan.
Or vice versa, right,
With,
right, right.
and because that's
There's a disconnect.
Yeah, and the comp plan is a bigger deal than, in a way. Okay. We need a whiteboard.
Well, I can take notes on this document, so, anytime we have something we want to say about a specific section, I can certainly add our notes.
So our surface water bodies, does that include the ocean?
Surface water.
It's not groundwater. Those are the only two categories. We have surface water and groundwater on the planet. I mean, it doesn't specify freshwater, and it doesn't say groundwater. So to me, that would include the ocean.
Jessica. Yep.
I don't have an answer to that.
Yeah.
But you have your name up.
Yeah. I think surface is within a land body and the ocean's not, but because we definitely don't follow that otherwise. My question is that I think in some instances in the zoning, but not in the land use, you can ground truth wetland impacts. And so I just wanted to see if we could walk through kind of what that looks like. So NORMA is targeting areas that we believe are environmentally sensitive. They require additional review. If you do a wetland delineation and a third of the NORMA is actually wetland, how does that operate? How does that play out?
Okay, that's a great question. Because there is an administrative way to move that NORMA boundary up to 660 feet based on conditions on the ground. And so, let me see if I have that language right here. If not, I have the internet, but I don't think I pulled that into here. That is in the future land use element, and there's a sort of a procedure for that. Now, in what we have to look at to do that administrative adjustment is a delineated wetland and the required buffer. What we have by practice also looked at is that area in the floodplain? Is it in a floodway? Are there other unique features? So the language in that part of the comp plan, you know, the specificity is at least the wetland delineation in the buffer. There's some interpretation that could say the NORMA could include other features that are important. If the area that you would want to be adjusted is greater than 660, that's no longer an administrative function. And but yeah, because the NORMA was established so long ago, the mapping technology we had was, you know, the people were drawing the line on paper maps, right? So how fat your marker is could have been more than 660 feet once you digitized those maps, basically. So yes, there's a process for doing that. Let's see. All right, so I made a comment about Atlantic coastline. I don't know the answer to that. And then there is a comp plan policy that says expansion of navigable waterways is prohibited in Volusia County. That's not necessarily in the Code of Ordinances. It's relatively new comprehensive plan language, though. But maintenance dredging, of course, is permitted, but has to comply with the Land Development Code. And then this last policy is talking about RGIS mapping being used as base data for determining presence of wildlife species and related habitat. And that's something we continue to work on, but I put it here because it really gets to that point about, you know, some of this stuff is not ground truth until we get a permit application, right? And we are out on that site. And so that language isn't necessarily in the code either. It's probably not a huge deal, but it is one of those sort of inconsistencies or I don't think that's the right word. They don't match.
Or is it also an expediency? So big picture, we say these are areas that we think have listed species that are important. Oh, now someone's applying, so now we need to invest in the manpower to actually go out and look? Is that?
Well, certainly the idea of ground truthing the whole county as one big project is overwhelming, and
Yeah.
we couldn't do it with our staff. You know, you'd have to hire a consultant to do that work, and it would wouldn't be
I'm not
cheap
sure that would
either.
be a benefit, but.
If only we knew somebody that.
We have 45 minutes left. Would we like to go on and discuss buffers, or do we want to take these various items that are inconsistencies and begin to tackle them? How would you like to proceed as a group?
It sounds like some of these items that Ginger has just introduced are big,
Mm-hmm.
that it's going to take a lot of time to kind of draft new language from scratch. So I would say let's go, with short time left, let's just go into the things that we can make minor tweaks in and consider that.
Okay. Okay, well, the third question you asked was, you know, what is the basis for the wetland buffer requirements? What is the research? What are any proposals or recommendations of the staff? So first here is the current language. And so in the wetland code, the language is that a buffer not less than 25 feet in width is established adjacent to surrounding all wetlands, except, and here's some language, outstanding Florida waters or NORMA, and then buffers greater than 25 feet may be required if the activity adversely impacts the wetlands. So there's a little bit of ability for the environmental management director to have an increased buffer width. So using that language, we apply the 50-foot buffer to eco because we haven't actually codified the eco language.
Is there an example of activity that would adversely impact the wetlands and justify an increase in the buffer width? Has that been exercised before?
Yeah, we have required increased buffers, over the 25, if it's a sensitive kind of thing, like let's say they're doing something that's potentially hazardous materials or something like that. And we had one recently, yeah, if,
Subdivision, when you come in on Spruce Creek, they did 100-foot buffers for that one. Something with the riparian zone.
yeah, so if there's a RHPZ, a riparian habitat protection zone, we've, increased the buffers in those cases. Typically not, though. It's
But
not
it's
a
not
normal thing.
typically that like somebody's building a house and they want a bigger pool and now it's.
And now
you
we
know,
say, oh, well, now you've got 35 feet now.
Jessica Gout.
Is there a way that let me say, does the county have a list, or is there a way to quantify the sensitive uses? So when you think about like contaminated sites, like brownfield sites, there's your classics, of course, gas station, you'd look at it, truck stops, you'd look at it, car dealerships, but I mean, ferneries, nurseries, all of those are also large contaminators. So I don't know if there's ever been instances where those are applied.
No, not so much, because those sorts of uses typically, if it's a bona fide agricultural use, it's exempt from the wetland code as long as they're using best management practices. And so we're not regulating those buffers, really. Specific developments where we know, like you were saying, like gas stations or those sorts of things, definitely, but ag use is not really. And then section C of that says buffer not less than 50 feet established in areas that designated OFW and NORMA. And there's a little caveat there if it's a small lot and it's an old subdivision. Looking at some, so there's a lot of research in the nation and other parts of the world about the value of wetland buffers, the functions they provide to the wetland, et cetera. There are a couple of studies that are more local that make some more sense in our area, in other areas with a lot of topography or whatever, maybe those studies aren't as appropriate. I provided those both online and in the email that you sent, and I have quotes from those, both written by a UF professor. One was commissioned in 2000 to look at wetland buffers in St. Johns County for some ordinance work that they were doing, and then an older paper from 1995 that was looking at riparian habitat protection zones for Spruce Creek. So I provided those. That is not the entirety of the body of work out there about wetland buffers. They're just the ones that are most closely in our area. So the bottom line is that depending on what you are trying to accomplish with your wetland buffer, it looks like something around 300 feet is the appropriate wetland buffer to protect the function of the wetland, the hydrologic function of wetlands. And in the case of the one for St. Johns County, they looked at the presence of protected species and those species habitat requirements, and came to the conclusion that this 300-foot buffer would protect about 50% of the wetland-dependent wildlife species that exist in St. Johns County. Our buffers are 25 feet and 50 feet, right? So, one could ask where those, what was the impetus for those, and of course I wasn't, none of us here were here when those buffers came into effect. My understanding is that it is back to that idea of balance, right? So if you think that 300 feet is the right buffer to protect the hydrologic function of a wetland and a predominance of the wildlife species, if you established a 300-foot buffer on all of the wetlands in Volusia County, most lots aren't 300 feet, right? So, my belief is that was part of that balance discussion.
I think I might put it a little bit differently, and I think this is an important moment for all of us because it gets down to what we value and why we value it. So we know that there are protective functions performed by wetlands that protect man-made structures because they help to mitigate against flooding. They help to replenish our aquifer. They help with clean water. I know that's a passion point of Tyler's, not just quantity of water, but quality of water. So the wetlands perform all these functions. Then we also have the wildlife habitat. Both the studies concluded, oh my gosh, I just put down my paper. Both studies concluded or made the case that to protect the functioning of ecological services of a wetland and preserve wildlife habitat, buffer dimensions need to be 200, 300 feet. What does that mean? It means that you have to protect the upland, not just the very edge of the waterway. When we want to have balance, and I am for balance, and I understand that in less sensitive areas, maybe we conserve that balance, but when we talk, if there is going to be harm, if the wetlands function is going to be negatively affected, that's not really balance. It's like, sure, I can cut off Jessica's legs and she can get around in a wheelchair, but she's really not going to be, she's not going to be functioning in the manner that she functions today. It's going to be a lot harder for her to drive a car here, for instance. So it really is going, and the question is directed to Norma and ECO in this case, not to the whole county. We can't do it all over the whole county, even if we wanted to. But if in these most sensitive areas, do we value wildlife habitat? Do we value plant life? Do we value those services that the wetlands perform that might take us toward increasing buffers? Or, I'm just putting that question out there because that's what we're going to have to talk about. And Bliss.
You didn't like the salamander thing, so I'll choose a different thing. In speaking about, industrial land, I'm not an environmentalist. I'm a conservationist, conservationist, I'd say that. So when we're talking about this and we're talking about our entire community, if the additional buffer, and this is where I don't think we have this evaluation, if this additional buffer is going to save, if this additional buffer is going to give us 3 frogs, whereas if we leave the buffer as it is and we still keep 2 frogs, so we have 2 frogs and 150 jobs, I'll take 2 frogs and 150 jobs over 3 frogs. Is that?
Can't hear.
Yeah, there we go. So I think it's not the difference between like the 3 frogs and the 2 frogs. It's the difference between having the frogs there and them being able to reproduce and continue on versus not. And kind of weighing this with the industrial versus residential and things like that, I definitely appreciate kind of an increased residential, or not increased residential, increased industrial, because that's actually where a lot of the economic basis comes from. But when we're kind of thinking, kind of put the kind of lens of Tiger Bay, and we put a SpaceX facility in the middle of Tiger Bay, are the deer and bear and everything that enjoy Tiger Bay going to be enjoying that if rockets are launching? They're going to be finding other ways to be, where other places to be. So that buffer size and the 300 feet that's kind of cited in those reports is definitely like, holy smokes, that's a lot of land. But it's not a single frog that we're talking about. Yeah, it's the system and kind of how everything interacts with each other. It's the food web idea, the water quality, all sorts of things. But anyways.
It's the whole balance. It's the whole balance. So we're back to that word, balance.
I am now. As a person who teaches ecology every day of my life, I actually tell my classes balance doesn't exist. We're always in a state of dynamic flux. But here's my question. I think that a one-size-fits-all, it may not be the right solution. And we have lots and lots of different types of wetlands in this county. Lots of different types. You all know that. And in some wetlands may need a 300-foot buffer. Some wetlands may need a 25-foot buffer. I think that you would have to take into account the topography of the surrounding land. Maybe 300 feet takes you all the way to the top of the ridge, which is clearly not a wetland anymore. Or maybe 300 feet is still wetland. So I just think the answer is it depends. And, and yeah, it isn't just about 3 frogs or 2 frogs. It's about all the frogs and salamanders and panthers and bears and everything, that are approaching that wetland and what needs to be done to protect the entire system. But protecting the entire system means doing nothing anywhere ever. And that's not an option in the spirit of balance, which is not a thing. And so I don't know. I'm struggling with what the magic number is. I don't think there's a magic number. I think it's really site dependent, and that makes it impossible to make a policy.
And then you're back to the Keith has all the discretion, right? Which we've heard we don't like. Yeah. No. We have to, obviously we have to have something that we can enforce, and we can't be arbitrary and capricious, right? There have to be standards. We try really hard to treat everybody the same. It makes our job easier. It makes the folks on the other side that have some certainty, it makes their lives easier too. But I don't disagree that it could definitely be site specific, but I'm not going to be able to enforce a site specific code. But we could probably come up with something different than what we have now.
I have one more thing to add. The other thing I would add is, and I know we're supposed to be talking only about wetlands, but where in the code do we protect uplands? Because they are very important ecosystems as well. They are habitats for many, important and protected species. And it's the uplands that actually do most of the aquifer recharge, not the wetlands. And so, wetlands may do the filtration and they do a slow recharge, but it's the uplands that do the recharge. And so where in the code are we protecting the uplands? And if 300 feet allows us to protect some uplands, then, the problem is we've built on the uplands because that's where it's easier to not have flooded properties. And yet what we're left with at this stage of the game is most of our uplands are built out. And we're looking more and more and more at these marginal lands for building, which are the most sensitive lands environmentally. But I want to say again, the uplands were sensitive too, but they were gone. They're gone now.
So I have a thought in, Wendy, as you were explaining that you could be at the top of the ridge, you could be 2 feet above water line. I had been picturing that when they were talking about the study, and I was picturing St. Johns County, which is pretty flat. We have a little bit more elevation and topology in Volusia County, especially in the western side of the county with the ridge. And 300 feet in a pretty flat area might only be a couple feet vertically, and that might explain the need for a larger buffer. Have we looked at vertical offset from where we establish our wetland lines as a potential component?
I will say this, that we measure the buffer from the top of bank. So if you have, like along Spruce Creek where there's a significant bank, we start measuring the buffer at the top, not down at the bottom.
Right, and so, but if we measure a 50-foot horizontal buffer and we gain 1 foot of elevation versus 10 feet of elevation, I think we all understand we're going to see, and I mean, that's, you know, the bank of the river, there could still be an inflection point. We're going to see a difference in the ecology that exists there. We're going to see a difference in the usable habitat. And I don't know if there's any, I mean, these are the first studies that I had seen referenced from Florida on where the buffers are. So this is my, you know, academic brain going, is there information that's looked at both horizontal and vertical, or, you know, could it maybe be an or? We need to meet a minimum horizontal of 25 or a minimum vertical natural of 5 feet, or, I mean, and I'm picking numbers out of my thin air here. So that was a thought that I had when you were talking, Wendy, that I think maybe there is some fruit to that investigation. One of the other thoughts that I wanted to go back to, and Todd, you were talking about it earlier and talking about the value of wetlands in flood prevention. I think the reason that we see wetlands as having better flood water storage value than uplands, and I'm going to take a moment and say a cubic foot of water doesn't care what it's sitting above. It's a cubic foot of water is the space it takes up. In an upland, it's not as flat typically. You have those steeper slopes. So when your flood stage rises in a relatively flat area, we have a huge expansion. We don't get as much rise from the same increase in water volume. When we get into some of the areas that we have more slope, or where you have a flat area and you fill and you confine and you create channels and other things, that stage rise has to go up a lot more to accommodate the volume. And I think that's some of the challenge that we're having, is the balance of fill. West Volusia versus East Volusia dealing with aquifer recharge. It's the third point that I had in my, I apologize, I know this is a bit much. So West Volusia, we have a lot of closed basins. We have a lot of dry ponds. So our pre-post hydrology, frequently we actually put more water in the ground after the development comes through than we did before the development comes through. So in terms of aquifer recharge, protecting our hydrology, we're doing a good job in those sites. The sites that we just have a wet pond, that it drains to a canal, we're probably increasing our runoff. We're probably decreasing our aquifer recharge. And so within the, as we're looking at this rules, it's kind of been discussed as if it's one size fits all, but we really, within the existing code and within the different areas that we have to meet in the code, address this with a lot of different sizes of systems. And those are all mitigations. So most of our meeting today, we've talked about avoidance and minimization. And I've been trying really hard to wait my turn on the mitigation soapbox, but I really think that we're running out of the ability, and this is some of what Bliss, I think, is getting at. Avoidance and minimization only works to an extent, and then we have to look at what can we do to mitigate so that we aren't worsening the hydrology, we aren't taking away effective habitat and other things. And I learned a lot from that buffer stuff. I want to look back further and read through those studies, but I'd be curious if you find anything in your world. I'm off my soapbox.
Yeah, I don't have any answers either, just more questions and comments. Because I think we're probably leading into another round of discussion on this. We're not gonna find the answers in the next 21 minutes, I don't know.
Come on.
But I think when you look at buffers, and we talked about this a little bit last time, the concern raised, right, on how the code is implemented is the modification of buffers to a certain extent and kind of a minimum. What we've seen in other local governments is pulling in site characteristics to say maybe in Norma and Eco, it's a minimum 50 feet, it's an average 100, so that you can kind of, you know, contour it around certain site features, or based on site topography or features, you can request, we're giving power to Keith, that it's modified down, but not less than 25, you know, if it's supposed to be 50. So there are, I think, provisions that allow that flexibility while giving greater protections. I think one of the things, and we talked about ground truthing a bit, is I think the way the 660 boundary adjustment works is you have to have a certified wetland delineation by the state or
Yes.
wetland delineation by the Corps or FDEP, which takes forever to get them
Yes.
out on site. And so looking at alternatives for maybe a third-party review or something like that.
Yeah, that's a thing for sure, and that was an attorney thing because it can't be arbitrary, it can't be
Right.
us
Right.
approving the line and then saying where the 660 line could be. So, but yeah, that definitely stalls the process.
Right, so just some time there. And then I was going to say to Wendy's point, because we do always say environmental must mean wetland. It doesn't just mean wetland. But I know that county staff has a great system of maps on high groundwater recharge areas and things like that. And so I'm curious how much of our high groundwater, like out by Tiger Bay and all those areas, is already incorporated in NORMA and ECO, and maybe looking at that as a factor too.
Yeah, well, we can pull up those layers too and look at that. I have an example on the screen just because you brought up the thing about the, minimum buffers, average buffers, et cetera. So this is a lot on Johnny Anderson. This is what it looked like in 2006. There was quite a bit of wetland and almost the entire lot was buffer, right? So, but this was a lot that had a right to build a house, right? It was a vested lot. The owner came in and this was the house that got permitted on that lot, right? It's a crazy lot. It's long and narrow. There's some wetlands over here on this kind of north side, and then the buffer really went all the way up to the road. So this is what got permitted. And this was based on as much as we could, our avoidance and minimization criteria. So the buffer here is really much reduced, right? So whatever's going on in this house and in this backyard is probably impacting the Halifax River, right? So that was in 2012, and that was, how that got permitted. This is 2014. This was not permitted. This was work that was done without permits, but you can start to see so if you had a minimum and an average buffer, right, all of this was supposed to be set aside, right, because this was so close to the river. This was all supposed to be protected. Well, this is what that homeowner chose to do. New driveway came in, they kind of cleared this wetland and everything. You can see here's this new garage right here. So seeing that, oh no, that's part's not new. In 14, it was just all of this. Then in 2023, right? So this gets to a couple points. It gets to avoidance and minimization, and it gets to average buffers. So now this deck is here. This garage is here. There's very little functional buffer left. Unpermitted.
And they found builders to do this for them unpermitted. I'm not saying I'm sorry.
Right. Right.
And I live up there, so when you call code enforcement, good luck getting them out.
So this is just an example, and it's an extreme one. The extreme ones stick in our heads. So when we're looking for examples, we're like, oh yeah, I remember that one, right? Yep. Of where, this idea of a minimum and average buffer kind of comes into play. Did not work out real well in this particular case. Now, not everybody's going to do things without permits, and
Not everybody's a criminal.
but
My interjection here would be that this is why I was saying earlier that once the lot is platted, the wetlands on it are destroyed, is because the enforcement element of human
Yeah.
nature on the unpermitted work, at some point, somebody buys that property and gets a little bit aggressive with their rental bulldozer or whatever on the weekend, and then what do? It's why we don't put lots on wetlands anymore, unless they're big and, but.
Yep. Here's another example. This is also up on John Anderson. So this is a house, right? But this gets to that wetland buffer issue, right? Because the wetland buffer there is 50 feet, because the Halifax, it's important, that, this is the areas that we've decided deserve the most protection. So here's a house and here's their 50-foot buffer. Now, I think we could argue that this grass is maybe not like a fully functioning wetland buffer. But that's what existed in 2006. Somebody bought that lot, tore down that house. This is their 50-foot buffer.
This is my life.
And this is part of kind of what we have a little bit further in the Word document about strengthening the buffer regulations, right? This doesn't really meet our avoidance and minimization criteria, but it's one of those where, because we don't have something really clear that says, okay, well, if you're here, maybe we'll permit half of the buffer or something, we end up.
So this one was permitted?
This one was permitted. So, this is an example of why to.
I'm not being aggressive. So how did it get permitted? If the previous home was more or less in compliance, Jessica wants to answer.
I want to play devil's advocate on this one, because we had a recent example of a similar item, and I think when you have a very manicured neighborhood where this is, where you have a lack of natural vegetation in the rear yard, and where you have seawalls and pools that expand out, then the homeowner gets this lovely idea in their head that if they can't have it, you are taking away rights that are commonly enjoyed by others. And so if you buy a $1.2 million lot on the river, you should be able to have a backyard pool. That's where they're coming from, and I think the construction base, and part of it is we have gone to a point in these areas where there is sod and it is manicured and it is irrigated, and it probably isn't meeting those environmentally sensitive functions that they're supposed to.
And it's being landscaped with invasives
Right.
by a couple of companies. So going back, so the answer that I will infer, and not ask anybody to just outright answer, I will infer is that an attorney made a threat to the county. And just nicely said all the things that you said, and the permit was issued.
I wouldn't say that, maybe, but it may have been looked at as it was previously impacted. So the change in function is not to a great extent. It'll probably pressure.
We're starting from something already degraded.
Yeah. Did they change the location and repair to the seawall?
No, I don't think of the seawall. It still has that same jog.
And I mean, I would argue that the seawall was cutting that off as natural habitat already, so.
And those are getting built every day.
I think these are cases where it's easy to see the operation of the before and after photo. If you start looking at the conditions, it's not what we want.
That one's definitely
I
not.
shouldn't say it's not what we want to be protecting, but it's not the high value habitat that's getting bulldozed in that case.
Except, and forgive me for just jumping right into that, I agree with you. And this is where I've lived, I know this area since 1965. So I've seen it get built up, My neighborhood, I used to be able to ride into the loop. There just was no building up there. Of course, my home took away habitat, and I know what that habitat looked like because I moved onto this street before it was all built out. So I'm very well aware of what my own home took out of nature. So I agree that situations like this, it's already degraded, but if we just keep letting that move out and move out and move out and move out, eventually we're left with nothing, or we're left with it butting up to conservation lands. And that's why part of why we have the conservation lands, because we will have nothing left.
I think a lot of what we're looking at here is we want to take away people's development rights or modify development
No.
rights. And then they're showing us examples where prior development caused the impacts that are not allowed today. And it's a question of when they redevelop, do they get hit by the new rule, or does it get grandfathered?
And if it were a perfect world for me, I'm happy for those people to have those homes, and they're living in a beautiful area, and I assume they enjoy it. I wish I could go out and convince all of them to have a living shoreline on their property. which would be a good thing to have. I would rather them do that than go slap them on the wrist and fine them. But it's cold comfort to me to say it's already been degraded, so let's just degrade it some more. And then let the one next to it be degraded because that's the proper usage that's the highest and best use of that land. Because the neighbor next door has a pool. And that is what's happening. It's a big bunch of McMansions being built out. Not to pick on my area, just using that as an example.
Yeah, this is a different area.
Thank you.
So here's 2015.
Keith.
There was a small historic home here. This area is redeveloping also. So, in 2020 they had demolished the home, but this, shoreline was still relatively intact. That's what they built. That was not.
They removed
This amount of buffer.
And it's all impervious surface.
It was. This was resolved it was a violation that was resolved through permitting, but it wasn't.
but they removed a mobile home
Right.
and put in a, bricks and mortar.
Yes.
Does that change any of the rules on?
It's a 25-foot buffer here. This is in class 2 right? Yes. This is also in river religion overlay, which says that you have to retain 30% of the site for native vegetation and you have to hold all your stormwater on site.
Okay. They can have a climbing wall, a vertical wall. So we're looking at horror stories here, at least in the eyes of some of us, and really we have 9 minutes left right now, and I'm tempted to say that we have more homework to do, and maybe we take 9 minutes to make a list again if there's any additional information that we need to have. Or to make sure that we do our reading for the next meeting. Jessica.
A question.
And Wendy, I'm sorry, too.
I was just gonna add, back to the example of back to the example of the home up in Ormond. If it's $1 million lot and a $5 million house, then it kind of gives me a little heartburn that they only, if they were to pay a mitigation fee, it would be $1 per square foot. That would give me heartburn. It's like some people can pay, some people can't. Clearly they could. But you also can't apply that, differentially as well. So there's that. But I love your idea, Melissa. It's like, look, you can pay this fee. It's exorbitant. Let's make it exorbitant. Or you could put in a living shoreline. Those are your two choices. And that then incentivizes the living shoreline restoration. And I'd love to see something like that to give some options and make the cost of it prohibitive so that putting in a living shoreline is actually the less expensive option.
So looking at some of these examples that they've already shown, of vacant land, and you're talking about putting in a natural living shoreline, I'm saying and I'm asking Tyler, there isn't room, is there?
I don't know how.
On some of these examples?
I've lost too many arguments that you can't man-make a natural thing. And so the restoration of a natural shoreline, I've tried to argue that we can rebuild something that mimics the natural conditions pretty well, but recreating a natural shoreline once it's gone, I think that's the point John was making, is once it's gone, that's why I was saying earlier, it's already gone. Like, it's not further damaging the ocean or the river or whatever else.
Except again for the cumulative effect of it.
When the seawall is already there and what's happening is above the seawall, it's already been damaged. It's that, in my mind, that grass wasn't a native grass. It wasn't useful to the native habitat. So, to that answer, I think you'd end up with beaches. I think that we would plant things that, I think about the dinner table conversations I've been around in my life and how many people don't know why it is that they can't have a beach in front of their house or whatever else, and how many people would be like, oh yeah, I hired the gardener, he went ahead and cleared all that out for us. And, you know, that you have a violation or whatever else, but I don't think that reestablishing it is a possibility in a lot of these cases, my opinion.
There's a lot of, what brings to my mind is there's a lot of new construction. I walk it a lot. I walk John Anderson on weekends. And some of the lots, I do have to question how they're built. They're so narrow. There's a big drop off. It's wet there, and those are all getting filled. We're in effect creating more land where there isn't land right now.
They have to be filled because they're in the floodplain.
Yeah, and then they also have to have the mounded septic system there on the Halifax River, which is impaired for nitrogen in my area, but that's just one small thing. But some of the new construction, I would like to see living shorelines. It may not be possible on those incredibly narrow lots that they're having to fill because of floodplain, and really, to me, they are beach. I mean, I'm talking about stuff that's incredibly narrow. Wider lots, why not? And there's a wetland restoration up there, too. Jack, what are you saying over there?
New Smyrna Beach. Samsula.
Because they knock it down to increase the view.
Mm-hmm.
And so to tell somebody they're gonna put something back in and lose their view.
It's a tough sell.
Obsolete. Yeah.
Yeah, a 10-foot mangrove is not gonna block the view from a $5 million mansion. It's just not.
Pool deck has privacy.
You can go naked.
Oh, okay, all right, all right. I had a quick question because my baseline understanding is that with some horror stories on enforcement, when they come through for permits, right, it's after the fact, it's twice as much. Have we ever looked at where it's a wetland violation, the after the fact being more than twice as much? Based on the size of the impact or encroachment?
The mitigation fee.
Yes.
So the permit fee is double if you come and get a permit
Right.
after you've already done the work. The mitigation fee, we have not. It
No.
is what it is. But
Generally, we try to make them replant it if we can. Or
Yeah.
remove whatever the problem is. If it's a shed or something, we make them remove it and replant it.
Right. With the dock and the
Yeah.
pool deck. Right, yeah.
The one house was in the city of Oak Hill, so it was built under there, even though we do their environmental permits.
Mm-hmm.
So they never contacted us to tell us that they were being.
I see.
So we were really
Gotcha.
kind of forced to go ahead and permit that one.
I say in the back, right there, 32 inch, you know? Yeah.
What's killing me is all that cement that's so hot. Okay, when you went for,
Oh, sorry, I'm done.
okay, Mr. Brady, you also done? Next steps, to be continued, cogitate on all of these 4 points that we have discussed partly. We've heard, okay, let me frame it this way. We have listened to one another this afternoon. And I think we tried to understand different viewpoints, and I think we would like to come to something that we all feel is fair. Gosh, I can't say all that over again. I'll try. We've listened to one another today. We have our reading materials. We have new points to consider. Maybe what we do is have a real hard think over the next month and try walking a mile in the other one's shoes and see if we can come back. There have been a lot of good ideas tossed out here. We can't do cookie cutter, but we can't do everything custom either. And I think there have been some very interesting notions raised. Tyler with his vertical wetland buffer measurements, Jessica with different delineation. I mean, there have been some creative thoughts here, and I would encourage us to explore those more and come back with our creative thinking caps on and keep doing the good work that I think we're doing, because this is not easy, folks. It's not easy at all. And I thank you again for being here.
Can I make a suggestion? Just if we're thinking for next time, we did throw out some staff suggestions for buffer widths and some staff suggestions for strengthening the, what you can do in a buffer. So it's not that we're married to those. Those are, hey, listen, we have to start somewhere in a discussion. So that would be great to get to basically the bottom of this third page. But is there anything else that you need us to bring back? Or fees, okay.
I think the only thing I was curious of is if we know how many platted lots we have or small lots, that it's gonna be unavoidable wetland impacts like Daytona Park Estates. You know, I don't want you guys to have to go spend hours chasing it down, but if it's easily readily available information.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just curious the scale of that, because right now my thought is that's not really worth our committee's time to really dig into, but I don't want to be wrong and lead with that thought.
If possible, with that research, if we can see that agricultural land that has those plots already plotted in there as well, those vacant lots plotted in those agricultural lands. Because that's your upland.
Would those be non-vested lots? Yeah. Yeah, and I'm really just wanting the vested lots, the ones that somebody can come in today and build on. I think is, and not to say that that's not valuable information as well, but I think that's what determines what are we at risk for. You know, what if we do nothing, how many acres are you going to get?
And it's going to, and it's like water. It's going to show us where the cheapest and highest end of growth will happen. I mean, same with water, you know, everybody goes for the cheapest water until you don't have it anymore, and then you gotta pay for it. So, same with lots on agriculture.
Well, and that's a great point. Maybe next time we could spend some time with the map, right? And so we can zoom into areas, we can pull up, you know, all of the different layers that we have, zoning, future land use, NORMA, eco, all those things. So if we want to play with the map some next time, if we have areas in particular that we want to look at, like Bliss, if you want us to zoom in at that area down in southeast Volusia and look at where are the industrial lands and what are the overlays there, I mean, let me know if you want to in advance, and I can kind of be prepared to do that, or we can just sit here and play with this map as we talk about the different impacts. And I can send you the link. I'm on the online mapper. I'm also not a GIS person. I use the online one. But I can send the link in our follow-up email, and you can fiddle around, and if you want to send me some areas that you specifically are interested, like here's the southeast Volusia area. And
Ginger, I don't know that it does, but does this have the wildlife corridor as a layer?
It doesn't.
Okay.
If this is not my laptop. But we could, you know, if we didn't want to use the online map, or if we wanted to use an actual, like, our map, we could do that.
That Jason Moritz and shared seem to have been updated in terms of conservation lands, and what he focused on that could be of interest to this group, of a lot of interest, is he was pointing out a few areas in our county. You'll recall, Ginger said that eco, the primary goal of eco was to provide connectivity through the county. There are pockets, we've done a good job conserving, we've done a good job of preserving corridors, but there are a couple of very important pockets where we do not have connectivity. So we're not fulfilling what we set out as a community to have as a goal. So I don't know if Jason could get that map to you, Ginger, or if not, not, it's in the PDF of the wildlife corridor presentation. You kind of focused in on.
Right. Yeah, that's that area, right,
There was one down by Merritt.
yeah.
The southern, southeastern part, and another in the.
So we'll fiddle around with this map, or if we want to bring another map that has a few more layers, but,
We'll have the vesting and everything else on it.
that's true.
Yeah, if there's, I was thinking if there's anything, because in your suggestions, it said, include the riparian habitat protection zone and things. So if we could see what that does to the boundary,
Okay.
I think it would be helpful.
Yep. Yeah.
Kind of identify what the highest ecological value plants would be to kind of set a priority list for leadership forever.
I don't have that data.
That's also gets to the FEPM.
And I can ask Jason, he's going off to work for environmental consulting firm, but I'll ask Jason.
Jason would be the one, yeah.
If he can send those over to you, because they were kind of cool. They were really technical, kind of complicated, but what they accomplished was
Right. Yeah, I know that one question when we're looking at it, like, is it this? Yes. Okay, so fee schedule, mapping, we'll see if we can do this exercise about platted, vested lots and compare that to where wetlands are. If anybody thinks of anything else you want to know. Perfect.
If I offer my office for anybody that wants to kind of dive into GIS a little kind of outside of this meeting, is that violating sunshine given? If you talk about these matters.
Microphone, please.
Only if you talk about these matters. If you say here's the GIS system of the county. Yeah. I'm substituting for Chris on that.
All right, adjourn?
Standing up like it's, are we ready to adjourn? We don't make motions to adjourn.
No, you just say it. All right, we're adjourned.